We'll call the meeting to order. I think we have a few minutes after 6. Where did my agenda go to?
Where?
Okay. Roll call, please. And with respect, we've gotten word that Mr. Kostadakis may be delayed or not be able to make it due to a vehicle problem, so.
Ms. Stone?
Here.
Mr. Kostadakis?
Here.
Mr. Kostadakis? Mr. Lamont?
Here.
Ms. Remark?
Here.
Mr. Libby?
Here.
Ms. Ramsey? Here. Mr. Lee?
Here.
Chairman Webster?
Here. Okay, Tracy, can we do a pledge and invocation?
Sure. Everybody up? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Dear God, we just thank you for the freedom in which we gather, the freedom in which we exchange thoughts, the freedom in which we state concerns, just the freedom. In your name, amen.
Amen.
All right, next is the approval of the minutes of September 12. Do we have any motion with respect to the minutes?
I'll move adoption of the minutes.
Any other comments, discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Passes unanimously. Public comments? Any public? John? We should just have these rephrased as John's comments.
Yes, John's comment.
And it's not nice.
God
will get
That was
you.
nice. That was being nice.
That was meant in a positive vein.
Okay.
He meant to say Mr. Johnson.
Okay. Did you want the knife back? John Nicholson, 413 North Grandview Avenue. The question I have is for Carrie. What is the legal implication or responsibility of this board if they know that there is malfeasance in funding that they are looking at? Are they responsible if the funds are spent incorrectly for the Main Street Redevelopment Board, if they know that it's incorrect?
This board's just they make recommendations to the CRA. The CRA is the one who's actually responsible for the funding.
Okay.
So
they're
I
not
would not say
responsible
this
if they
board
know
is-
that it's misspending and they don't look into it
No.
or say anything?
I wouldn't say no.
Okay.
Not that we might not do something about it.
Okay.
There
Or
might
try
be.
to.
Recommendation.
That's right.
All right. Again, I talked to the mayor and the city manager about the fencing that goes along the boardwalk. It's peeling. I told them before it went in it was going to peel.
You're referring to the railing?
Along the boardwalk. It took 6 months and it started to peel. Now it's really, really peeling. And the fence that, Tracy, you wanted in front of the rides, that's peeling as well. So I asked the city commission, and I'm asking your recommendation, to change the fencing, because there's no sense in having it peel on a regular basis. So they're going to spend enough money to dig it out, take it somewhere, sandblast it, repaint it, bring it back, put it back in, to save that cost and get a different style, because that's an everyday style. It's not anything interesting like Fort Lauderdale did. Fort Lauderdale did this fantastic wave along their beach. Miami Beach did a coquina wall. If we could have something that's dynamic, that will not succumb to the elements, because whatever they do is going to peel.
Is this an aluminum fence that powder coating your paintings peeling on?
Yep, that they said it would never peel. It
Oh,
took
yeah.
6 months.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Okay. Any other public? Moving on then to item number 5, DEV 2012-053, conditional use permit 415 Main Street. Reed?
May I, Mr. Chair, since we had that public comment, maybe address what we're doing? Because
Sure.
we do have our public works staff working on some of the different looks. So they're looking at everything from a different railing to making the painting repairs with the existing and keeping it in place. And I say that because there is already some folks who have done a good job with our A1A lights. Remember we had all that painting problem? So we used somebody who used the paint that was used with NASA in their rockets. So that was important, is because it made a difference there in A1A. It's holding up. It's a some kind of paint that can resist any of these high salt content conditions. So it doesn't mean that that's how we're going to proceed, but we're looking at the different techniques that will improve what we had, which that powder coating on the aluminum just isn't holding up.
Read, for what it's worth, if they look and they're going to go back to scratch and start over,
Yeah.
suggest they might look at actually a high-quality anodized aluminum. I've actually seen just a straight anodized aluminum. That's what's used on all marine vessels and such, all your yachts and all this. Use a lot of anodized aluminum, and it holds up a whole lot better because it's not an actual finish that goes on it. It's a chemical treatment, and puts a good finish on, cleans a lot easier, and is easier to maintain. So, and it's cheaper than getting powder coated too. So,
Okay.
but it comes in a shiny aluminum color. But
I know.
or you can actually do black or colors in anodizing too. But
Bronze.
yeah, you can do bronze, blue, orange. Blue and orange.
Appreciate that. I'm
How about red and yellow?
Garnet and gold or whatever it is.
Yeah.
So what we'll do is we'll work with our engineers and see what kind of options we do end up with. But I know they're actively working on that.
Okay, very good. Then
Thank you.
moving on to
Sure.
415 Main Street.
Yes, this is the former Wise Guys restaurant, and they have the property owner, Archie Dodani, has a new tenant proposed to go into the building, and he is here this evening. And Mr. Am I pronouncing it right? Tim Vines? Vians. Okay, Tim Vians is here and is representing this request tonight. Now, this is required to get a conditional use because he's within 500 feet of another restaurant that serves alcohol. And for that reason, our requirements include several items that you have to follow to establish that restaurant again with alcohol. And nothing has really changed inside since it was first built in terms of the restaurant bar areas, the seating areas. They have tables inside as well, and that's not shown on your floor plan. You see the fixed seating, but you don't see the other tables. There's a calculation shows there's room for about 150 tables in there. And it appears that all of the requirements have been met. And let's see, I gotta make sure in your PowerPoints information that was handed out, I just want to bring up that one section that was a concern, and part of my reason for not making a recommendation to you when I wrote the report was that I still felt that I needed to have the documentation that explained that one item regarding the 25% of the area was mixed use and met that requirement of some kind of retail outlet, amusement enterprise, or live entertainment area. That mixed use component has to be there, and it wasn't in any documentation backup we had. So the applicant promised to address that. I have some information. I'd like to hand that around so that you have this somewhat rough graphic of what's there to show you, and this is, bring it up on the screen as well, shows you how, working with the zoning administrator today, the zoning officer, we excluded certain areas of the square footage that's required as a part of the land development code. Then we identified those entertainment areas with the applicant, and ultimately they have meet the 25% requirement, minimum of 25% of the area for entertainment. And I understand from the applicant there's even some consideration of some additional entertainment that they would consider. And if you want to have the applicant come up and talk about this, I think it would be appropriate at this time.
So this request is just for the two-story Wise Guys building, not the adjacent building to the west?
That is correct. They do not have that property. I think it was a T-shirt shop or something in there before. Still is.
And oh, go ahead. I had some staff questions before we heard from the applicant.
I guess mine is for staff. What are you excluding that's in the 2,400 square feet?
The exclusion is bathrooms, kitchen, and some of the areas
Serving
that are part of kitchen, the stairway areas.
hallways.
And not all hallways. The reason we don't exclude all hallways, it's really part of that dining establishment and the interaction. But when you get to the point where it's really about the travel lane or hallway that's getting you for mainly the kitchen and the bathroom, we've excluded those. They can't be used for anything else. So in some ways, you can interpret it different ways. I depend on the zoning officer to make that interpretation, and graphically this kind of shows you the thinking behind that, so that where the patrons are using the space, that's how we calculate the amount of area, and then we look at how much of that is entertainment area, and that brings us up to what is just over 25%.
Okay, and Reed, I could read on the bottom section, you have pool tables and the stage, but on the other one, I see T-shirt, but oh, that's stairs, and then what's underneath? Stage, and then what's underneath? Written, I can't read that.
Merchandise.
Oh, that is
Something machine.
Pardon me?
Oh, boxing.
Yeah, boxing.
Oh, boxing machine.
Yeah,
Okay.
and they put that in the corner, and it's a dance area as well. I mean, if you have a stage, you have a dance area, that all can get included. So that's why at that point we're at 25%. Again, the applicant, I think, has some other thoughts about adding a couple more items, but this is what we had earlier today.
Mr. Chairman, you want to go first?
Yeah, two things. First off, Carrie, for a conditional use, okay, what we do is based on, this is the condition, and part of the condition is the stage is here, and this is here, and that is there. So this is, or is it just part of the condition? Does this become our site plan?
Yeah.
Yes, it shows where the tables are and the areas are.
Okay,
And so you need that to determine if there's 25% or not.
okay, so this is our site plan, okay. And then I just had two questions of, and I wanted to make sure you're crossing out the bar area inside where the employees are, but outside where that's how I would interpret the seating is.
That's
like
correct.
being in, okay.
That is correct.
And then on the TRT, page 1 of 4 in our backup, I was just curious, engineering and fire both said reviewed, no comments. Does that mean comments are pending, or there was nothing that they needed to say in those particular areas?
Yeah, there was nothing needed to be said.
Okay, all right, I just wanted to be clear on that
It was
one.
found acceptable.
It would have, okay.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Gary.
Reed, are you then at a point now and where you're going to be staff is going to be making a to this board?
Yes, I am.
Well, before you make that recommendation, do we know what kind of liquor license they have?
Sure. My understanding is their liquor license that they're going to have here is an SRX.
Okay, and the requirements for that are they different from ours in terms of seating, or we have 50 seats, or they're,
Slightly, but they're close.
They're looking, I think they have to have 150, don't
Yeah.
you?
Okay.
For an SRX, or is that for this
SRX.
kind of an SRX?
Yes.
And
And-
you have to have 51, this is an important part of an SRX, you have to have at least 51%
Food.
of
Food sales.
Sales.
Okay, so does that make this a non-smoking establishment because they're serving food?
That's my understanding.
Yeah.
Okay,
You can't
all right,
smoke.
all right. And you said they do have seating for 150 seats or 151
Well, that was
somewhere
the-
on here?
That was the calculation done by the architect in the original 2002.
But we don't know if this
plan.
does.
Well, that, I cannot tell you that it does or does not, but a SRX won't be issued unless they establish that they have that
Okay,
number.
That's a different
And-
God.
okay,
It's a beverage department,
okay,
right?
Yeah. Yeah, and they they're gonna go in there, they calculate the distances you have to have
Okay.
between chairs and tables and
Okay.
everything.
all right.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I have several questions. Read in here, it says this mixed-use.
Please try and point out where it is you're looking at so we can all be drawn
Yeah,
to
so
it.
we can go.
So you're on page
Oh, I'm sorry, 3 of 4,
of the City of Daytona Beach Reviews notes.
yes. It
3
says
of
here
4.
that this 25%, this mixed-use component shall be arranged and oriented to increase the pedestrian-level visual interest along the primary frontage of the alcoholic beverage establishment. But I don't see 25% along the first floor pedestrian level. I see it mixed all through both floors. So does that qualify to satisfy this requirement?
Well, again, it doesn't say first floor. I think the idea, though, is to give people a reason to come in. And these windows that are across there are pretty wide, so you can see in. You could see a pool table. You could see the things on the first floor. On the second floor, I'm sure you can see up there from
You can.
from down on the sidewalk, at least from the pictures. You should be able to see that.
I'm presuming that the pedestrian level means the first floor. I don't think it would mean the second floor, would it?
No, I think if you're on the pedestrian level and there's entertainment above, I think you can apply it that way.
Okay, all right. I have
It's been the
several.
interpretation.
I'm sorry, thank you. I have several other questions. I noticed in the application that was done in 2002, it states, as you just said, that 51% of the gross sales shall be derived from sales of food and non-alcoholic beverages. I don't see that mentioned, though, anywhere in the following conditions that's stated for this 2012 application. Is it just not in there, or?
It doesn't really need to be because it's a separate application. You know, if they couldn't meet it, they might be beer and wine, or some other license.
Okay. And then I have a question for Carrie. It says here that the business operator shall keep separate records accurately distinguishing between sales of alcohol and other items, and the records shall be available for inspection by the city. Is that done? Is there records of this?
What page are you on?
Oh, I'm sorry, I'm on the 2002 application and condition number 28. There is no page number. It says condition 10 at the top, and then it's almost, it's.
Well, we're going to look at condition 28 as it exists today,
Mhm.
It has changed.
and so that's
That's
not
what I
in there
wanna know.
anymore. So,
Okay.
So can you
So
tell us how
act-
it's changed?
The
Well,
law
it's-
changed from 2002 when this was first reviewed,
Uh-huh.
and so when we look at it, it's just by today's requirements.
Yes, but
and
my
the,
question is
as
how
far
has
as
it
like the
changed?
receipts and the 51%, that's going to be governed by their alcohol license, which would be the state. So the city doesn't have that in their requirements.
That's my
The state-
question. Is
the
that who
state
does
does
it is
that.
the alcoholic?
Right.
Okay, all right. I have some other comments, but I don't have any more questions, so.
I do have one more question based on what Ms. Ramsey just said and what you answered, Reed. If they can't meet the SRX, you stated they might then have to do some other kind of license. If they do some other kind of license, is what we do tonight cover any license they do, or does it only cover what's being proposed?
It would give them the ability to serve alcohol within 500 feet. So what, and then if they got a different sort of license that,
So they could get a license that would change, if they don't meet the SRX, they could get a license that wouldn't have the food requirement on it,
Correct.
and they could just be a bar
That's
within
well,
500.
our regulations require, because they're going to have to meet.
They
about
have a
having-
kitchen, but it doesn't, our regulations, I mean, they could just have submarine sandwiches or something. They
Said
could have a full
sh-
kitchen that they don't use, but they
shall-
could be more of a bar than a 51% is a different atmosphere than just a bar serving,
sandwich.
and I'm not saying you're going to do it, but just a bar serving nachos and submarine sandwiches. So what I'm asking, is this based on the license being included that we're talking about, or does this open it up for anything?
I think it opens it up for them to serve alcohol, and it's not conditioned upon what type of license they have.
Okay.
Is,
I didn't understand that
is
answer.
Tracy asking whether or not we can make it a condition, or?
Right.
Well, as a conditional
It's-
use,
no,
the
it's not in
conditions
our
are
land
there. We
development.
can't add new conditions. But, so they're coming to the city saying, as a conditional use, can I serve alcohol within another 500 feet? We say yes or no, you meet the conditions or you don't. They have a separate alcohol license to deal with the state, whether it's the SRX, 4 COP, 2 COP.
But if what they're representing to us is the kind of establishment, alcohol establishment they're going to be, and they do not become that kind of establishment,
I think if that needed to be a condition, it would be one of the stated ones. You would be obtaining a SRX. You know, if that was intended to be a condition, it would be stated so.
but since it's not in
Right.
here, okay,
That makes an awful lot of difference.
okay.
Do we know whether or not this property is included in the master plan for special events? It's been closed for several years.
The master plan only deals with outside activities.
And there'll be no outside activities?
It would be my interpretation of the guidelines that there would be none.
Okay. Does the applicant know that? I guess we'll come to that, I guess. Okay.
As far as inside, they would not, the guidelines don't.
Well, during special events, they've had outside activities at that location. They've moved tables and chairs out onto the sidewalk on both Main Street and the side street, and they've participated in some of the relaxation of code that we allow during special events. But if this property hasn't been evaluated, I guess, for the upcoming year, maybe they have
Right.
time, maybe they
Well,
would have time.
the deadline was in May,
Yeah,
and one of the requirements is they have to be open.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the bottom line is, you didn't make the application for Bike Week, but you,
Biketoberfest.
Biketoberfest, but you might make Bike Week if you got in now. Yes. Okay.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I have several comments and everything I want to make about this, but I don't know what's the appropriate time to do that.
Well, if you
Do
just
we
want
have
to comment and deal with the applicant, we can do that. We're just trying to get up information so we can question the applicant in an informed perspective. So I think if
We're
you just want to
getting
make
stuff on
comments,
the
I would wait,
yeah, on the table, okay.
Okay.
okay?
Okay.
I'd like, Carrie, I would like to refer you to page 3 of 4 of the materials with respect to what was sent out for the city comments, and I just want to make sure I'm on the right track here. And if you could, when you get there, if you could let me know. I'm sorry? That looks like it, yeah. First, up near the very top under notes, it
That's what I'm
says,
just reading.
nightclubs and bars are not permitted uses on Main Street in the RDB2 zoning district. A restaurant is permitted and can serve alcohol provided they meet the conditions referenced in Article 12. So what we're looking at here is a proposed restaurant, not a nightclub or bar. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. And then
So a beer and
coming
wine.
down, it says under paragraph 28, one of the following sets of conditions must be met. Either A, all conditions for restaurants per Article 17, Section 2.13B, or in subpart B, all of the following conditions, and a list 8 of them there. And then the Article 17, 2.13B conditions start near the bottom of that page. So it's an either or. We either have to look at the 8 conditions under B, or we look at Article 17, 2.13B.
Correct.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Can I just ask one more question? You just made me think of something. Okay, if a nightclub and a bar is not allowed and a restaurant is, do we have something in the code that says that a beer and wine, because like a beer and wine bar is not a restaurant. We have something that says what a restaurant is. So if he doesn't get the license that lets him operate as a restaurant, he cannot open this as a bar or a nightclub.
That's right. That's the point of that that's my comment, is
Okay.
we're not allowing nightclubs and
All
bars
right.
because they're not defined.
And we understand that in the code is clear enough on the difference between a bar, a nightclub, and a restaurant. We have those requirements.
And the applicant knows it, is the big question, Tracy.
Well, I'm just curious on
Yeah.
the code, because it might become a code enforcement thing. I just want to be,
Yeah, we're dealing with it downtown right now.
Okay.
And we're very familiar, and we've made some significant changes in the code regarding alcohol with
Okay.
some of these places, so we can have boutique bars and.
but a
and-
boutique bar is not a restaurant.
That's right.
We're not, okay.
That's right. Just
All right.
so you know,
That's what I'm
there's some-
asking here.
That's
Okay,
I have another question. Mr. Chair.
thank you.
Carrie, I toured Main Street on these restaurant bars, and I found 8 were occupied and 3 were vacant. And I found that several of them were not serving any food at all. So if they're under the same regulations that this man is under for his bar, I guess my question, Carrie, is who oversees that?
Well, these regulations that are before you tonight does not necessarily mean that's what's
Mhm.
applying to some other business. Depending on when they came in, if the alcohol regulations were different
Mm-hmm.
and they've remained in business, they would be operating under different.
Oh, they don't have the same
Mhm.
requirements.
Mm-hmm.
Code enforcement deals with whether or not somebody's complying with the land development code, but it's hard to know just off the top of your head. You know, I don't know when they were approved.
So are they sort of grandfathered in other words, if at the time they applied, they didn't have to meet this 51% or have a full 2,500 square foot kitchen, then they would be grandfathered to operate that way into infinity? Is that how it goes?
We have some some discontinuance of use provisions where if they went out of business and they're in a redevelopment area, if they went out for 3 months or more, they would have to come up to these new standards.
But if they don't close for 3 months or more,
Correct.
they
Then
can
they're
continue to
still-
operate under the code that they were given their license
approved
under. Well, that explains it. Thank you. I couldn't quite understand the difference that was going on there. Thank you.
But keep in mind, depending on what liquor license they have,
Yeah.
okay, if they're operating under, I guess, so the SRX, that's the food with, you get it if you have 150 seats. If they're operating under one of those and they're not serving food or serving it when they're supposed to be serving or serving the amount they're supposed to be serving, which is highly suspect of many of the facilities, then, well, it's not
The
a city
state.
code violation, it's a liquor
State.
license
State
violation,
ABT.
and they should be reported to liquor license people.
But Carrie just said that if they were,
Two different things.
if they were licensed at the time that the code was different, that they had operated under that
That's-
old
No,
license.
you're talking two different, you're
Yeah,
you're
there's
talking,
your-
one is the city code that had certain requirements when they were allowed to open. And they have to meet those codes, you don't get to impose new ones on them. Okay? But then if they go out and they get the SRX license that allows them, because they have 150 seats, and because they have over 50% food, they're allowed to then serve liquor. If they're not serving the amount of food and serving it, and it's supposed to be available when they're open effectively, then they've got problems.
Hot food. Hot food.
Yeah, it's a different set of requirements, so.
Okay.
2 gods. One is the State Beverage Department,
Mhm.
and they have their conditions.
Mhm.
And then there's the city god, which is the zoning, and they have their conditions. And they're not necessarily identical
Yeah.
Okay.
or overlapping. They may
Okay.
be, but not always.
And if they're different, which ones take precedence?
They both.
They have
They both,
They
they
both
have to
have to
meet
meet
both.
Okay,
You won't be in business long if you don't make both.
okay,
Yeah.
all right.
Okay.
I have one more comment.
Go ahead.
Okay. I have said publicly here, when we've discussed a lot about the bike week and improving the quality of bike week, that I was the feeling that it was not something that we should really be focusing and creating, concentrating on, is because Bike Week now obviously sustains these bars and restaurants on Main Street, and it is their livelihood and their business. So my comment was, why don't we just let Bike Week be Bike Week these 2 weeks out of the year, let these businesses prosper and make money, and why don't we creatively come up with different ideas to give them a different customer base north and south of Main Street, where we can give them a different clientele that perhaps, I even said perhaps Teresa and some of our buildings and things would maybe even do some different types of businesses there. And I don't think it's fair until we give them that customer base, until we create it. I don't think it's fair to really pick on these restaurant bars, because it is what's sustaining their businesses right now. However, in the last 2.5 months, I have walked over 1,000 homes on Beachside. I did it first to get support for the ordinance for the inspection of rental properties, especially slum rental properties. And then I walked in campaigning for local people that are running for election. And I have talked personally to at least 200 homeowners and renters in lovely rental homes and homeowners themselves. And I can tell you that these people and myself in the north and south neighborhoods, and even further north and south of Main Street, these are not the type of businesses that we want to see on Main Street for our families and the people that live around this Main Street. The problem with these, there are 8 bars that are occupied right now, and this would be the 9th one. And the problem with it is it just creates more of a biker bar. You know, a Rose by any other name is still a Rose. And a biker bar by the name of restaurant is still a biker bar. So effectively and practically, realistically, we know they're biker bars. And like I said, I have no problem with them operating and living next door to them until we create another customer base for them. However, I must say, I am reluctant as a homeowner and representing a lot of the people that I've talked to that live around me to put another one on Main Street.
The applicant up. State your name and address, please, and
Timothy Vians, 1232 Harbor Point Drive, Port Orange, Florida, and I'm representing 415 Main Street. Suzanne, I appreciate those comments. That was great. You know, my main business is I work in NASCAR. I own a company called RaceDaySponsor.com. We do marketing, sponsorship, and driver management for several different teams. I manage about 12 drivers from Nationwide to Sprint Cup teams. My thought process with the Wise Guys building and the Mikey's Love is to make it a sports bar. What I would love to do is to bring my NASCAR ties to Main Street and perhaps create another 2 events on Main Street and working. Is it Teresa? You have buildings on Main Street as well? My thought process is, how cool would it be to be able to do something with NASCAR, the 2 big weeks as well, and potentially do some outside events there and have just race cars everywhere and driver appearances and all kinds of different things like that. But my goal with this property is to create a sports bar. I want to put TVs in. I'm going to keep the grill open 250 days a year, 5 days a week, and that's my dream for this property, is to make it a great atmosphere.
okay. Are you ready for questions?
Certainly.
All right. Let me start just because one basic question, and that deals with which of the set of guidelines, if you know, are you attempting to follow? Those under 28B, which list 8 different conditions, or those under Article 17, 2.1, 2.13. Do you know?
Can I get a copy of
Or you can tell me where
We
you
were talking with one of your associates who helped make that application.
Okay.
And it is Article 12.
Article 12? Okay.
Right.
Okay, so
So
that's
number 28, 10 and
28.
28.
Okay, Article 12, 28, and B, not Article 17.
Okay.
Can you read
Okay.
those for the record?
Page 3 of
Just,
4.
they're not that many.
This one,
okay.
this one.
The 28B requires compliance with all of the following conditions. The alcoholic beverage establishment shall be a year-round business, remaining open to customers no less than 6 hours per day, 250 days per calendar year. Number 2, the alcoholic beverage establishment shall contain a full-service kitchen that includes commercial refrigerator, freezer, oven, or stove with hood and fire suppression system that is used for cooking and preparing food. Number 3, the kitchen shall remain open and food available to patrons up until 1 hour before closing. The alcoholic beverage, or 4, the alcoholic beverage establishment shall contain a mixed-use component such as retail outlet, an amusement enterprise, or live entertainment area occupying no less than 25% of the indoor floor area of the entire establishment, exclusive of the kitchen, restroom, storage, and utility areas. The mixed-use component shall be arranged and oriented to increase pedestrian level visual interest along the primary frontage of the alcoholic beverage establishment. 5, the alcoholic establishment shall have permanent seating arrangements for at least 50 patrons. 6, the exterior appearance of the structure in which the alcoholic beverage establishment is located shall comply with redevelopment design guidelines established for the area. 7, alcoholic beverages shall be sold or dispensed only for consumption on the premises. And 8, off-street parking shall be available in accordance with Article 8, Section 2.5 of the code. Okay, so going off that premise, any questions for the applicant?
I have
yeah.
one.
Mm-hmm.
You want to just start with me?
Well, it's got to look at this way for a change.
Okay.
Teresa, anything?
You list your, there's like a menu,
Yes.
and your
that's correct.
beverages will be soft drinks and beer, right?
Yes.
Is that all that you intend to sell? I mean,
Um,
just, I think the board may be interested. I
Right.
don't care.
Yeah.
But,
well, the menu is very basic
Yeah.
right now.
Okay.
Obviously, we're trying to get people to come to the location because without the 2 bike weeks, I'm talking about the rest of the 235 days of the year.
so at some point you may go for liquor,
Liquor.
possibly.
Oh, yeah, well,
Alcohol.
Yeah.
yeah, we definitely want to serve alcohol, beer, wine, and food.
Dustin?
So do you meet all 8 of these requirements?
Yes, we do. Because we're definitely planning on being open the 250 days a year, 6 hours per day, serving food, right up, I would say up until, almost until we close. We have plenty of seating that meets that requirement. We're not doing anything to the exterior or the appearance, besides just changing the name on the signage. Alcohol beverages will only be sold on the property, and we have plenty of off-street parking as well. We have the back parking lot
Okay, I
next
was
to the
gonna
dry
ask-
Okay.
cleaners.
I was going to ask for that.
And Reed, based on what they resubmitted, is it now the recommendation that, there was a statement in here about there was no support until these couple questions were answered? I'm
Yes.
reading the slides, and it looks like they were answered, and that, the findings, so now everything's okay? or-
Yeah, staff is satisfied that they have met the conditions, and again, there's a couple outstanding utility issues that they'll have to comply with before occupancy.
That's what I was going to ask.
Thank you.
Suzanne?
Yes, Mr. Vins, let me ask you this. You just now stated that you were going to be open 250 days a year, 6 hours a day. If you're actually going to create a sports bar, one, would you not need to be open the 365 days a year to make the money that you would need to make to be a qualified, bona fide sports bar, such as like Oyster Pub, I think, on Seabreeze? They're not open just the minimum 250 days a year. So I would think that I'm still thinking that you're just going to meet the bare minimum that's necessary to qualify to be a bar. And so I'm really concerned about that. I mean, I would be so happy if this were going to be a true bona fide sports bar, like the Oyster Pub. That's the only example I can think of close by. And I would support that wholeheartedly.
Mm-hmm.
And if it was really food and children you could go in there and with their parents or whatever, and you're really going to serve good food, a good menu, and you were really going to be open 365 days out of the year, I would be all for this. But when I hear that you're just going to be open 250 days a year with a 6-hour-a-day minimum, it looks to me like it's a guise just to make the money on the 2 weeks of bike week. That's how I'm interpreting this. So please tell me I'm wrong.
Well, that is the minimums. Obviously, if we open at 10 a.m. and we're open till, I don't even know what time the city makes it close, but 2, that's 11, 12, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6,
14.
7, 8. That's how many?
14,
Yeah, so, I mean, that's my goal.
16.
You know, is to be open, let's say, I would love to be open 7 days a week. That's my ultimate goal. If we can draw the people in and do that, then by goodness sakes, I'll be a happy guy. But, we're definitely going to meet the minimums, and, we're going to build the business as we go and advertise it and, try to get to that point. That's my goal.
I have another question.
Certainly.
This is just my personal opinion. I've been just working so hard on trying to create a wonderful customer base for Main Street, and hopefully that's going to happen in the near future if all our dreams come true. But it's been pointed out to me by some people that have been here a lot longer than I have. I've not been here very long in Daytona Beach. That the bars on Main Street, the businesses on Main Street, don't even say the bars, let's just say the business on Main Street. It doesn't seem, and this is strictly my opinion, I don't know this as a fact, but they don't seem to draw any one of the tourists that come and stay along A1A. And I've been told that the reason they don't do that is because they are intimidating, especially people with children and families and that sort of thing, and young teenagers and kids and all that. So they don't really frequent Main Street. But I have a feeling that if these restaurants were designed with an appeal for the tourist, that you could sustain 365 days. And the Oyster Pub does it very well. So why can't we do that on Main Street? But you would have to have an environment that was not intimidating and thwarted the tourists from coming in there. If you could do something like that and start a base route of that, I would be all for another restaurant bar on Main Street. And the other thing I want to say is that I counted all the businesses on Main Street. There were 39 vacant businesses on Main Street. There were 8 occupied bars and restaurants. There were 12 occupied businesses other than restaurants. And there were 3 vacant restaurants and bars. So my feeling is this. If you could get the tourists onto Main Street by starting with your restaurant and appeal advertising, and we can even maybe do some, I had an idea about maybe we could even do some special events, things like you're talking about, to draw the tourists down Main Street. We could really be working, my neighbors and the people that live north and south of Main Street, we want a Main Street that we can walk on and enjoy ourselves and have a walking village down there. So if you could be a part of that, I mean, is that a possibility? Will you orient your restaurant towards that?
Absolutely. I mean, that's our goal, is to do that. I mean, if I have to put a race car drive down there every day of the week, then that I can do that. So, I mean, that's our goal. I've been down there the last few weeks. We've been painting the inside and doing all kinds of wonderful things. We just bought a ton of TVs. We're going to put flat screens in the entire place. I'm putting the punching machines in. I'm even going to put the golf things in there. So, if I was going to do it just to be a nightclub bar or just 2 weeks out of the bike week, I wouldn't put all that extra stuff in there because I would want the extra bodies in there. So the bike week's great. It's fantastic. I'm sure we're going to make plenty of money during those 2 weeks. But I'm looking at the rest of the year as well. I'm looking to make this a full deal, full time.
Well, I'm a retired commercial interior designer, and I do volunteer work with people on help them do things around the neighborhood and the area. If I can do anything to help you, I'd be happy to do so.
I appreciate that.
David.
Yeah, I just want to go back to what Mrs. Doan said. On your menu here, you don't have liquor listed. You have beer and beer.
Sorry.
Have you applied for the liquor license? Or when is that coming? Or is this?
That's all of that stuff is going through, right? They're doing it right now. The paperwork's been in, and literally, if you guys approve me tonight, then I'm going to Orlando tomorrow to complete that stuff as well. The menu is very limited right now. Obviously, it's going to be difficult for us to carry a ton of fresh food because we don't know how many people are going to come down there, and we don't want to have a lot of waste. So right now, a lot of our menu food will be freezer
Welcome
food.
to the restaurant.
Exactly. So a lot of our stuff will be freezer food, and then as, we build, let's say after bike week and we start getting a steady crowd, then we're going to continually add more and more fresh different things to the menu as well.
Okay, so going on about what you just said as far as the food, so this frozen food that you're going to be serving, then you're going to be heating what, in microwaves only?
No. We have a full kitchen. We have fryer layers, grills, the whole bit. So we're going to be doing everything from tacos and different things like that from the get-go, burgers, fries, everything.
Okay. That's all I have right now.
But as far as to answer your question, is liquor on a menu? We're not going to put it on a menu. Most restaurants don't put their liquor what they have. You look at it, behind the bar.
Then just say full bar
Full bar.
on the menu.
Right.
Then we're okay.
Yeah, that would have answered the question. Full bar.
Okay. A couple of those utility questions. Do you have a backflow preventer for
Yeah.
potable water? And is there a grease trap, an inspection manhole, and the existing sanitary service lateral? Do we have these things?
I think that was really left to the property owner, is my understanding, to make sure that was done. So that's something on the property owner's side that they have to make happen before there's occupancy.
There is a grease trap and there is a backflow.
Yeah, but we need to make sure that verify that they're meeting the current standards, and I have not heard that yet.
Okay, because there was a problem on an A1A once
Right.
the owner understood what we mean by a grease trap in our code.
Mm-hmm.
So there's no way that this doesn't have to meet what our utilities say here, what they require.
Right. There have been some changes, particularly in these inspection manholes, and we've had that issue downtown a couple times.
Okay,
So, so under these new requirements, when you open, that they just have to make sure. My understanding is there's plenty of room to accomplish this on site, not in the street, if in fact they need to put in an additional facility that meets the new requirements. But again, they may have it already.
Right.
Some do. And I can only say that that's a piece of information that has to be forthcoming, or we will not issue an occupancy.
okay, I just, because I know that's not one of our conditions, but it is one of the requirements for the occupational license.
That's
So if
correct.
those aren't there,
They literally were doing the inspection
Okay.
today on the
Okay.
backflow. I know that for
okay.
a
We just
fact.
had a problem with another property owner that didn't even see why he needed it. So, okay. And the license, by the way, tomorrow, I'm sorry, one last thing. The license, by the way, that you're going to, just so you say it on the record, are you pursuing an SRX license?
That is correct.
Okay.
Well done, Tracy.
Mm-hmm.
Gary?
Yeah, well, welcome, and I hope everything works out, because it certainly would be nice to see life in that building.
Well, today's my birthday, so if you approve it tonight, that'll be a great birthday present.
Tell me, you're comfortable with the non-smoking, and that you can't put tables and chairs out on the sidewalk for your smokers?
I am comfortable with the non-smoking. The only question I have is that we do have a big balcony on the second floor, so I'm not sure how that works, if we can still
If
allow
it's not
smoking on the
interior
balcony.
space, it's
interior
allowed.
space.
No, there's an outside
There's an
balcony
outside
upstairs.
Fresh air balcony space.
Upstairs.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you'll be
it's-
allowed to upstairs.
Yeah, I think
I
it's
just meant
allowed
into,
upstairs.
yeah.
I was very interested in your lease. And I was interested in your lease because oftentimes individuals try and take advantage of guidelines. And we have special events that come in certain times a year where we know that properties that demand modest rents other times of the year demand huge rents during those special events. So I'm always interested in looking at the leases, and I realize that your lease is for 1 year with an option for additional years, but the initial term of the lease is 1 year, which satisfies our requirement of at least 1 year. But I also noticed that I guess either you or the landlord could walk away from each other at any time during the term of the lease. You could walk away from the landlord and from the commitment of the lease for a variety of conditions that are listed in the lease. And it just seemed,
I don't believe that's true. I'm
Okay.
pretty sure I'm liable
Okay.
for the first year.
Okay.
But I have a lease option. It's my intention to buy the property. But as far as I know, the conditions were based, some of the conditions in the lease were based upon being open by
Right now,
October.
yeah.
Yes, and, you know.
did you pay your October 1st rent payment of $10,000?
Yes, I did.
And you have a receipt for that? Okay.
That's correct.
They're going to be getting money back.
My only other questions would be the menu, you know, and I think it would have put a lot of us at ease because we anticipated the requirement of the liquor license if you had demonstrated the full bar, that's all. But welcome, and I wish
Thank
you
you.
the very best of luck. And it would be very nice to see the Speedway have a presence on Main Street. I think.
I think it's something that we can do that'll be special. Another 2 weeks a year, take what you're talking about, bringing something down to Main Street. I definitely can see that happening.
All right, thank you.
Welcome. One thing that I noticed is, Mr. Libby brought up the lease, is that the following year's rent that increases, you need to add 1 year to each of those years, because they, you know, it's like October 1st, 2012 should be October 1st, 2013, but that's on page 2 of your lease, so that has nothing to do with us. So I'll move to what does have something to do with us. You mentioned in your letter that you were going to have trivia games and what have you. So basically, the people that are sitting in your restaurant would be able to play an amusement game while they're sitting there. So theoretically, your 25% that we're trying to create on the indoor floor space increases by the fact that every person that is sitting inside your restaurant is capable of playing that amusement game via the television screens. Would that not be correct, Reed? If he offers that video game.
That's the game.
Yeah.
Okay, so I just wanted, you know, because I was looking at the 25%, I see this little thing that I'm starting here, this is a site plan, and I'm like, well, you know, if a boxing machine, which I've had them before, sometimes they're too noisy and you're going to disrupt some of the people that are dining and drinking, you know, you may not want to have it, you know, but that's your call, not mine. Okay, because I mean, when they do the boom, I mean, it makes people jump, you know, but that's your call, not mine. But if you decide, I'm trying to say that I'm thinking that the 25% could also be accommodated by the mere fact that the people sitting in your restaurant will be able to play that amusement game, you know,
Right.
so that would, I would think that would also add to your percentage of indoor floor space that, you know, that's devoted. But anyways, welcome.
Thank you.
And, you know, and wish you luck.
Okay, a few questions for you, if I may.
Certainly.
First, and I may be off base, but I thought I had a recollection that project was under, or that building was under foreclosure. That there was a
I'm not
foreclosure
aware of
action
that.
pending on it.
I don't believe so.
Okay.
I believe Archie owns it. You know, from my understanding, he owns it, and there's not any problems there.
Okay.
My attorneys did the
99% sure
lease.
that his other building to the
West.
east is under foreclosure. And I had thought this one was too.
I believe I'm not. I can't really speak for him.
Okay.
But my understanding was the doghouse building. I think that's the building you're talking about.
Yeah.
Was, and it came out of foreclosure within the last few days, actually.
Okay.
That's my understanding.
Just, I'd hate for you to go spending tons of money
Well,
and have the bank take it right out from
My
under you.
attorney would be in big trouble.
Just something to check on. All right, let's talk about restaurant experience. Do you personally have any, or who is supposed to be running this restaurant?
I don't really have any restaurant experience. It's just been my dream to do something like this, do it here in Daytona, especially with my business with racing here. I have hired 2 consultants on the project, and they're the ones that are going to
And-
primarily do the daily.
Who are they?
Howard Navin, he's done some, I think he did the Aqua next to Razzles, and he's also had some, what are the Philly cheesesteak restaurants or chain he's doing or something like that. And also Michael Masella, who had Red Tails, and a couple other bars he's done as well, restaurants.
Okay, because in my earlier day, I worked in some kitchens and restaurants and fun stuff like that. And you're supposed to have 150 seat minimum capacity to get your liquor license. I don't see 150 seats as laid out on anything that I've got in front of me. Okay?
It doesn't look like it on this plan, but this also doesn't have the tables and the seating on there.
I know. But anyways, so I look at that, and I also then see where you've taken some pretty big areas out to come up with a 25%. All right, so I'm just getting a huge question mark because I'm not seeing, to me, what is substantial information today to say that I would approve this, because I don't see the seats, okay? And I see where there may have been seats, I see them being taken away. I look at the kitchen area, okay? I read what the city's presented us and what the code requires, and this is supposed to be a restaurant, not a bar that by the chance may serve some food. This is supposed to be a restaurant that, by the way, can serve some liquor, okay? The kitchen facility there is minimal at best. And then when you start talking about coolers and freezers and such to be able to put out restaurant, I see it's, I don't see how you're going to be able to put out any kind of full restaurant service to a minimum of 150 seats out of that kitchen with that capacity of cooler, freezer, storage, etc. Point in chief, the rec, okay? The rec opened up with this incredibly little tiny kitchen, okay? It had more than you got here, okay? And they realized they had serious problems, and they then added on coolers and freezer space and all this stuff outside the building to try and increase that. And then there were still always complaints by the kitchen people how it was way too small to be able to do what they needed to do there. I don't know if you watched it over the last 14 years, but it's gone under 3 or 4 times. And so I have serious questions as to whether or not this would qualify as a full-service restaurant, okay? And, you know, I would have liked to have seen your proposed restaurant manager and such to come in and be able to explain how this can serve as a full-service restaurant and service 150 people. I'd love to see it, okay? I'd love to see something that puts a real sports bar in there, okay? I live just a few blocks away. And I watched the wise guys go in there in 2002 with all these promises of, well, we're a restaurant and we're going to do this, and they were totally nothing like that, okay? They were a hardcore bar that came in with bands and everything and were an extreme annoyance, okay, with respect to the noise they put out in the community, and they were an extremely poor neighbor. They were, you couldn't even talk to them, okay? So my problem is this is supposed to be a restaurant that we're going to allow to serve liquor, and it needs to be really a full-service type restaurant, and I'm not seeing how you can do that out of the facilities that I'm seeing in front of me, much less get 150, maybe you can, okay? I also haven't seen anything showing compliance with the off-street parking requirements, okay? I haven't seen a parking lot layout that shows, well, first off, before I believe you can get to the parking requirements, you have to have the number of seats and everything laid out. Then you have to have so many parking spaces per square footage or whatever seats in the restaurant. I haven't seen that, okay? And I know that the parking area that's there is not a parking lot, okay? There's no lighting, there's no parking stalls, there's nothing laid out in there that I think qualifies it as a formal parking lot. yeah, there's a ramp up into it, but then it's all concrete or stone and such, or asphalt, but it's not laid out as a parking lot, okay? There's none of the lines, stalls, anything like that that establish it. So I have a real concern that this, because I saw it 10 years ago when they did the Wise Guys, okay? And I've watched other facilities along there come in and say the same thing, and then end up not being what they represented to be. The fact that you're putting in the flat screens and all this kind of stuff, that's great. I was like, yes. Okay, and I like the NASCAR because I've been wondering for years why we don't get some of that NASCAR money over here and helping out in this part of town.
Sure.
I would be a huge supporter of the concept if we're going to do it right. Okay? What I'm seeing here is I'm not seeing it done right yet. Okay? At least to my satisfaction. It may be to others, but I'm not seeing it. And you know, I'm seeing things that contradict each other too. I'm seeing stages where we have 2 stages going in, and I thought I'd seen something on here too with in the parking lot layout of a band area in the parking lot.
No, we're not using
That's
anything in
not,
the parking lot.
maybe that was the 2002 version of it. Is that what that was? Oh, okay.
You're just operating inside, right?
Just inside the building.
Okay.
only.
Then forgive me on the band in the parking lot.
Right now.
Right now, well,
Are you
special
putting-
events are a different story.
Are you putting chairs and tables on that outside balcony on the second floor?
Oh, I'm sure they are.
Yes,
Does
absolutely.
that count as 150
The-
seats? Okay.
Oh, yeah. It's bigger than you think. If you go down there, it's
Even
a lot
though
bigger
it's
than you think.
smoking outside, if it's designated smoking, I don't think it does count.
Yes, it does. Yeah, it does.
But
Yep.
we don't have the 150 seat requirement. We're only 50.
50 seats is what
We're
we're.
50
The
seats.
liquor license.
But that's not us. That's
Right.
the state. That's someone else's issue.
Yeah, but it would
The
be
only thing,
foolish
I
to
think, I
not
thought the
share.
set of conditions you were going for was the 50 seats.
Well, that's in there, but there's also, it's supposed to be a full restaurant, and I don't see what I consider a restaurant capable of serving. You
We
can't
have
someone come
everything in the
just a
kitchen,
second. You
okay.
can't- I don't believe you can have someone come in and make a representation that they're gonna have one thing, and then try to parlay that into some other compliance, but we're not doing that, and try to deceive us here. I think if we're gonna have 150 seats, it has to be 150 real seats. And when we see a sports bar, which I like the concept of, okay, then why are we having 2 sets of stages in a sports bar? Okay? Because I don't see, if you're having a sports bar, maybe I'm wrong.
Well, first, I'd like to just, personally, well, one, at the boardwalk, I have a much smaller kitchen facility than this, and I could, and when you have a limited menu, you could dish out thousands of, hot dogs, hamburgers, what have you. It's, like I said, I have a much smaller. I mean, look at my place. It's much smaller than this, and I could dish out a lot of meals, but I have a limited menu. Okay. But I see what you're saying about all the, I mean, that's why I opened up the door to saying that I believe that, that if he does have all these screens and the customers are capable of playing a game while they're sitting down and eating, like you do at Hooligans and what have you, then I could see you not needing the stage over here.
Oh, no,
and-
no, no, no. No, 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 no. Don't go, you could say you could have a coloring book on your table and you're having a game. No, no, no. We will go with what code says.
All right, okay, all right. Well, anyways, I'll just leave it at that. I just want to make the point that a smaller, I do serve a lot of food, but I have a limited kitchen
Are
facility.
you operating under a restaurant license?
Well, no, I'm just beer wine.
Yeah, okay, well, that's my
Yeah.
point. That's a bar that serves some food versus a restaurant
There we
that
go.
serves alcohol, okay? And we're trying to look at here a restaurant that serves, that we're gonna allow to serve alcohol. So it needs to be first and foremost a restaurant, okay? And it needs to be a restaurant that's going to be serving that food till 2 a.m. And if it's a sports bar, I see that as inconsistent with 2 stages being set up, okay? And actually, I think losing seats and that could be used for something else. I see those as inconsistent. But back to my question about the parking.
Yeah, that's a big
Where do
question.
we have anything establishing what the actual parking is, Reed?
Sure. It's in the parking, in the code dealing with parking, there's a provision that in this particular zoning district, you're not required, RDB2, to have parking. You have basically an exemption from providing the parking for this particular use.
That's what Article 8, Section
That's
2.5 is.
And thank you. You have it memorized.
Yes, I
Thank
know
you.
that one.
And I'm just saying that, and we just went through this with RDB 5 and making some text amendments, and this is a place where they don't have to have it. My understanding is that there's a provision being made, so they will have the parking around there customarily as Wise Guys had it before. Now, but there's no requirement they have to have that provided as a part of this occupancy.
But if they use the
conditions.
parking lot as Wise Guys used it, it's not in compliance. It's not, it's not a parking lot. We're allowing them to park cars on a paved piece of property.
Again, if there's going to be a use of a parking lot and that parking lot has been abandoned, if it doesn't meet some current code, then they're going to have to meet those code requirements.
Well, it obviously
Well-
does not meet the code, right?
Again, it depends on what parking we're talking about, because there is paved parking across the street, it's my understanding, across Hollywood, that has pavers, hence has in some places there's paved, and there's some that has concrete and striping.
Okay.
And so the question is really who's using what. There's still, you heard about, property ownership and what might be in foreclosure and what else is going on.
Right.
So I'm sure there's some other things that need to be sorted out, but there is no requirement for this conditional use to require that they have parking. So what we're talking about here is a restaurant. In this case, you can have an A1 or an A2 restaurant. And when we talk about full service, what's in the code is full service kitchen, not a full service,
This menu.
necessarily a restaurant. The code says that A2 or short order restaurants are those specializing in short order foods and beverages to be consumed on or off the premises, or providing services at walk-up windows or drive-up windows. A2 restaurants may include conventional restaurant services. And I think that's what it falls into as a category, and how the zoning officer is looking at this. And no different than what you see at the Mardi Gras. It's going to be more of a short order and not an extensive menu, at least at this point. But I do see a lot of the things that are in the kitchen that allow them to be more extensive than what the menu shows.
Absolutely.
So no parking requirements.
That's correct, sir.
Okay. And just so I'm clear, though, slightly, if we open a retail store next door, you have to have on-site parking still, correct?
No.
No, it's the zoning, not the use.
The zoning for RDB2 says you are not required to have parking. That becomes a choice of the property owner, whether or
Right.
not they provide on-site parking.
So then this use does not trigger the parking.
No.
No,
Nope.
the zoning provides that they're not required to have parking in that zoning district.
Well, then why are we worrying about getting parking for adjacent properties in order to be able to open? Because we've been hearing the argument, we can't open because we have to have parking. And so
The problem is not necessarily with each and every business. There are some that need it more than others. But if you look up and down Main Street and you look at where's the availability of public parking, and I stress public, that's visible, accessible, and you can find it. That's the problem. If we go around and count parking spaces on street and everything else, we could tell people there's a lot of parking here because statistics show that. But as far as the public, you and or at least me when I got here, and most people visiting our beachside, and we expect to have a lot of visitors here, they have a hard time identifying where the public parking is, and they run into a lot of
Because
these
it's got
little.
locks on it.
Well, yeah. I mean, there is an, I think, when we go back to park, we talk about that when and if that comes up.
Okay.
But I would say right now, for this purpose, parking is not a requirement.
Okay, thank you.
And I don't think this gentleman will be back to us complaining that we haven't provided parking for his very successful restaurant bar. I'm sure you won't. Okay.
David?
Okay, for clarification, Reed, are we tonight, if we approve this, are we approving this just according to city zoning and codes? So we could only seat 50, doesn't need any more than 50 seats?
That's right. What you're saying is that.
Wait, so if he goes to the state for their liquor license, and they come back and say, you don't have enough you don't have enough room in this building to put in 150 seats, we are not going to approve you for a liquor license.
And
He
that-
then can open up with just the 50 seats, beer and wine, and become just a bar.
That's correct.
Or
Well, he'd have to have the appropriate license from the state to serve beer and wine.
Oh, well, okay, there. Hey, just to serve beer and wine, you only need 50 seats, right?
I don't know. Do you know that?
No, I don't know all of those requirements, but again, whatever those requirements are, he'll have to meet them. That's the risk that they take going forward, and I'm.
Okay, well, shouldn't we know that then, what the requirements are for beer and wine by the state before we go ahead and approve a restaurant that says we're gonna serve beer and wine, and we don't know if 50 seats is enough or not?
Their intent is that they will be meeting the 150 seat requirement for their SRX.
Their intent, I understand.
Yes.
that, But I've sat here long enough over the years to know that the intent never comes through. And I'm saying if we approve this tonight, we're only approving a 50-seat restaurant.
Correct.
Restaurant, for
That's correct.
That's correct. At least 50 seats.
Okay,
Correct.
okay.
And that's eligible for beer and wine, and we know that. That's the
Yep.
bottom line. He's gonna try and go higher by getting the liquor license.
I have seats and tables for 150 plus there now. They will be there during Bike Week. If you come down there, you'll see it.
We want you to get a liquor
Mr. Chairman.
Yeah.
license. We do.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman,
And,
can I make a comment here? If I may, right now, there's nothing there, and it's just a building sitting around wasting space. He's got an idea to do something, and if it works, great. If it doesn't work, at least he tried. Right now, nobody else is trying. As I see it, he meets every one of these requirements, including off-street, since we don't have a requirement. So, I mean, I think we're spending a lot of time talking about things that are out of our control and that are things that he has to work through with the state or work through with just marketing consultants, and I don't know where we're.
Well, let me tell you where we're coming from. We have seen this too many times before, okay? Where they come in and promise we're going to be a restaurant, and they turn into a hardcore bar, okay? Which is totally different than what they represented in their application and their documentation and what they became. And they become that because they think that's the way they can make their money, okay? So I think it's our obligation to make sure, to the best extent possible, that it's actually going to be a restaurant, that it's actually going to meet the criteria, and then they're actually then going to be successful in what they're representing they want to be, as opposed to what they can turn into, and turn into too many times. So, that's where I'm coming from, is I've seen it too many times before. In fact, time after time, and so want to make sure that this is going to be what he wants it to be. And here's my last real concern, and perhaps you can help me with it, is you've come in and you've redrawn and you've put in the green areas that are the 25%, okay? Have you re-looked at your layout for your tables and chairs and everything to make sure you can have everything you've got in green and not have that as dining area? Because that's a huge impact.
Yeah, we have plenty of room to answer your question. There's 50 plus seating with what we have going on. The upstairs is gigantic. If you see the balcony and the inside, there's tons of room. There's tons of room for the seating that we
Is
have.
that all upstairs all open?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
And then there's, there's going to be, there's seats that are right next to the balcony, inside. It's all sliding doors that open up. The breeze comes through there. I think a majority of the people that come and eat at our restaurant are gonna go upstairs. So,
Okay.
I have a question. Is it unreasonable for us to ask to see a space plan with the furniture layout of 150 seats from you? Is that an unreasonable request?
Yes, because all he has to do is provide 50. You have to remember,
Okay.
that's that's our condition.
Okay.
He may not be able to provide 150, but that's not even our condition.
No, I understood that.
Right.
I just was asking if,
Mr. Chairman, can I call for the question?
Well, could I just ask one more question of legal? Since, just listening to this, we cannot impose further conditions, can we?
Correct. We would want the record to reflect
That they
whether-
met the conditional
whether you
use.
meet it, or if there's a condition you feel that it has not been met, what that condition might be.
But the condition would have to be within what's
One of
required
these.
by the code.
Correct.
Right.
Which is
And Carrie,
50
in
seats.
in the
Which is no
future, we
problem.
could, if we see that there's a flaw in the current code, in the future, we could address
Amend the
that
code
flaw.
to change the condition.
No. But we're trying to oppose what we see in our current code as a flaw on this gentleman. And what I'm saying is, I'd like to call for the question, and then in the future, we could have a discussion where we correct that clause so that, because you've seen it time and time happen to you, and you're right, so let's address it at another meeting,
Well, yeah, and I think the question is that this could have been a lot shorter and a lot sweeter a meeting if we had had everything that makes up an appropriate application.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think it's,
I hate to, it's not your fault, but I think,
Oh, yeah.
Well, yeah, it's sort of, actually,
Well,
I'm sorry,
yeah,
it
but
is. He
no, no.
signed it
Well,
12 days
Reed's fault.
ago.
It is, but it's your birthday.
We're dealing with
It's your
this-
fault, but it's your birthday, so we'll
the
cut you a
dealing
break.
with the
Right,
staff, I think the more answers that are provided, the fewer questions.
all right.
I call for the question.
Thank you. Do we have any public comment? John? Or questions?
John Nicholson, 413 North Granbury Avenue. The reason why he doesn't have to have parking, the rec bar had to have it because it's in a different area from Peninsula to the river. A1A is a different area, that's why they have parking, all right? Secondly, yes, there's more than enough for 150 feet. Trust me, I own 2 restaurants, and I've managed 3. There's more than enough for 150. That's for the SRX license. There are several kinds of licenses. That's your hard liquor license, liquor only. Restaurant, SRX is restaurant only. I do have a problem. We have a flaw in our system that will not affect him, and you can't do anything about it. That's 51% food. All right? You changed the rules several years ago, thinking that the people would be honest because we wanted to keep them in business, because Froggy's and several other places are restaurants, and they have a restaurant license, and they must serve 51% food, and they can't. All right? So you changed your rules. That's why you have 50 seats, to help them. And now they're refusing to serve food, all right? Whether he serves food or not is up to you. My concern is that if you don't do this, you will have 2.5 city blocks that are empty. Archie went before the courts Friday. I don't know what happened, but apparently he's allowed to do this, all right? That's just the restaurant and the back parking lot. The front parking lot next to the laundromat went into foreclosure. Archie doesn't have it any longer. The lot next to Bank and Blues, the big lot, went into foreclosure. The bank has it. They're hopefully going to do bicycle parking on both of those. Doghouse, nothing can be done. Doghouse has to remain dark. The only thing you'll have between the cemetery and Bank and Blues is going to be the laundromat tent. They have one little tent in the front. That's all you're going to have. So it'd be to our advantage not to have this huge empty space in the middle of Main Street. Secondly, year-round, it's good to have something there. I worked 2.5 years for something from Main Street. I talked to Teresa, in the past about having a sports bar in this exact location. I talked to her about having a country and western in the full moon because it looks like a full moon. There are 17 places along Main Street to eat, drink, and entertain. The more variety you have, and if you make it a destination, it can start to turn Main Street around. If people start coming in for entertainment, for restaurants, then you have feet on the ground. Once you have people walking the streets, then businesses will look at it and say, well, there are people here I can trust opening a business. Until you get feet on the ground, they're not going to open up anything. So I worry, my biggest worry is the people he's going to have running it. The guy from Aqua, they went in, they took all their trees out. If you go to Aqua, there are no trees there anymore. It's all gone. Secondly, my neighbor's son was paralyzed at Aqua. Another person was stabbed. So Aqua has a very, very, very bad reputation. I would not like to have that come to Main Street. That's my biggest concern, is to bring that element to Main Street. We don't have killings on Main Street. I wish we don't have them. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public? Any further board discussion at all? All right, let's call the question. Do a roll call, please.
Were you going to
Did we get a second on it?
We need a motion
Did we
and
get a
a,
motion?
We haven't had a motion.
Oh, I'm sorry.
He just called the
Do
question
we have a motion?
Okay, I move for approval
Second?
based on
based on the staff's
supplied
recommendation
and supplied site plan.
and the site plan that was given to us.
Okay,
Okay.
okay.
Then all in favor?
Roll
Oh, I
Roll
don't-
call.
Roll call.
Ms. Stone?
Aye.
Mr. Pascalakis?
Aye.
Yes, I'm in favor.
Mr. Lamont?
Yes.
Ms. Remark?
No.
Mr. Libby?
Yes.
Ms. Ramsey?
Yes.
Mr. Lee?
Yes.
Chairman Webster?
No. It passes, what, 5-2? 6-2?
6-2.
Congratulations.
Happy birthday.
When do you hope to open?
With all the state stuff going through, hopefully by Tuesday, Wednesday, I would say. Right around. Got a lot of work to do.
Don't let us down.
And Mr.
You
Webster,
don't.
I want you to
Less
come
than
down
that.
after Bike Week and sit down and we'll watch a race together on the big screen.
Sounds good to me. I'd really love to see that succeed as a sports bar and such there. We really need that kind of establishment getting going,
We're
so.
gonna make it happen.
Sounds good. Okay.
Reed, I have a question. Yes. Or I guess maybe I should ask Carrie. What happens if that would have been, what was the vote again? It was 2.
But I can't hear you.
Could you speak in your, I couldn't hear you.
Yeah, I can't hear
I'm sorry.
What
I was
happened,
just
what?
What if it's, it can't be 626?
Okay.
Never mind.
Okay.
We have left on the agenda the E-zone regulations, and then I'd ask to have also put on revisions to master plan guidelines, and then the usual after that. And Tracy had let me know that she needs to be gone by 7:30 or so, is that correct? And then it occurred to me that Bike Week is around the corner with respect to the concept of the revisions to master plan.
Biketoberfest is around the corner.
Biketoberfest, whichever it is. And the revisions of the master plan guidelines and such, and I really wanted Tracy to be here in part since she's got so much history
No, I
involved in
agree.
that. So
So-
I'm going to suggest that we table that until next month.
Next month?
I
I'll be
move-
here the
I
whole
move
time.
to table revisions to the master plan guidelines to next month.
Actually, not table, continue would be
Continue.
your,
Second.
All in favor?
aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Okay. See, that way you won't get out of it.
Okay.
And then the E-zone regulations, what have you got for us on that, Reed? Is that these lovely,
Reed,
bright,
Reed, before you go on, I believe that you had a few copies that was given by Jim Morris to pass out to the board members.
is that what these are?
Oh,
Yes.
oh,
It
okay.
ended
I
with
don't
you.
have
I didn't know
those.
where it ended. Okay.
Well, I saw them sitting here, I didn't,
Okay.
did they go one way or not the other?
They go
I
to
don't
your
know.
left.
Pass it down.
Keep going.
Yeah. All right.
Thank you.
Oh, you guys
Well,
got
no,
them on that side?
I had Jim bring me one.
Oh. Oh, okay, never mind, we got plenty.
Okay.
We're doing the bike week stuff.
Mr. Chairman, it's an awful lot to read very quickly.
I was, here's what I was going to suggest, how we approach the E-zone regulations, and Reed, I would like for you to give your little dog and pony show, okay? I think Jim has some input, and he's certainly been busy.
Patient.
And we'd like to be able to take that and get other input, and then let's
We
absorb it.
also, in addition to Jim representing the boardwalk and my father-in-law and, you know, properties in that area, we also have Alex Ford in the audience, who's also representing property owners in the area.
I wondered what, brought Alex all the way over here on Wednesday night. Good to see you, Alex.
All right, and could I just ask one thing, because we just had this on the planning board. Mr. Paspalakis, I'm assuming will have a conflict of interest in terms of this item?
I believe that the E-zone regulations are going to be widespread enough that
Okay,
not everyone, but multiple people have interests. So
Okay.
I think looking at the AG opinions, it'd probably come out on the side of it's not just him.
okay,
So I think it's going to be fine.
okay. I just wanted to
So-
make sure.
What about issues that are just a particular person who might be a particular piece of property? Doesn't,
Well, I think these regulations are, we're not just passing one specific regulation, we're looking at them in the grand scheme of things. So I think at this point, he would be okay to participate in the discussion.
even when it comes to a particular piece of property owned by the individual?
At this point, that's my recommendation
Okay.
without having further researched.
So the concept is we're going to do some basic good discussion, fill us in. Tracy can pick up on that by video and such, and then we can continue the
Thanks,
issue and come
Dad.
back next month with it. Does that seem fair?
That's fine. There's a couple things I'll mention in a minute here to probably shorten it up too for
Okay.
you. Okay. If I could start it off and then ask for a presentation and that we have a presentation that could go uninterrupted, and then we can go back and look at different slides and ask questions afterwards, just so we get some continuity here. Number one, I just want to make sure everyone understands that again, Clarion and Associates has tried to take the master plan for the E-zone and translate that into a land development code, which is not always easy. That's why they're doing it and not us. And staff has made some very preliminary comments back to Clarion. Initially, we see there's more work to be done, obviously, as I think some of you do, on some of the language that we're seeing in this preliminary draft. So that's for beginners. This draft will be subject to further comment over time, and I want to make sure that everyone understands that we're talking about this item coming back before you each month, and we certainly are not getting to any conclusions or consensus. It's not expected until after the first of the year. And I still have no idea of where we're going to be on a deadline yet, but I know we're going to get to the end of the year here without being asked to come to some conclusion on this. So if things change, say in December, we'll certainly let you know in terms of trying to press forward on these regulations. The E-zone overlay, as I said in my memorandum, is completely voluntary. It's about opting in. If, for example, you're in that RDB2 district where we just had the conditional use request, you can remain as the property owner, as the tenant, to take advantage of what that zoning is today. If it burns down and something happens there, and you want to build in accordance with the RDB2 district, you may do that. You have those vested rights. Over time, things can happen in terms of the land development code rewrite, where regulations can be changed, the land development code can be changed. As you know, in the E-zone, parking is certainly going to be an issue. The alcohol provisions we just talked about are certainly going to be an issue to address on Main Street differently than how they exist today. And so there are going to be some things outside of the E-zone itself that could change in the future. But the point is, today, with what you have today in RDB2 or any of these other districts, you retain the right to use those regulations, to follow those regulations and how you build and operate, use your property. If you want to use the E-zone, you may. And you can opt in, and there may or may not be advantages, and we'll see a presentation. It will start to give you a visual idea of some of those differences. I wanted to also provide a comparison between the zoning and the E-zone. We had one property owner in particular that has taken some steps to look at how the changes may be between the zoning district and the overlay. Are there advantages or are there greater restrictions as, say, an individual property owner on Main Street with a small lot or a couple of parcels, and how does that affect you now versus what your future rights may be if you elect to go to the E-zone? And in some cases, you might find that it's more advantageous, or you may not. The E-zone is really intended for redevelopment to at some point in the future bring together a new kind of a Main Street that still is compatible with some of our historic properties that are on Main Street, but also allows for some new and more interesting space and buildings than you currently have there, and will bring in some new and we hope more diversified uses that fit within the E-zone. It's a long-term proposition. It's not a short-term. But as investors come in, as property owners want to sell their property, or property owners want to redevelop their property, it creates. It's nice to have two choices instead of one, two different ways to go instead of one, and so it really opens up some new possibilities in the future for people who want to elect to use this. To make sure that this works, that the E-zone really makes sense and works, that's why we're having this discussion. We'll continue to have this discussion, is when you move from an E-zone master plan to real code, some of the things that are anticipated by those who were doing the initial planning may or may not wash out as being workable. And so that's what we want to start looking at. And the first part of that is really to help educate ourselves about, well, what do these codes mean? What will it look like? Let's get a sense of that. So that's where we turn to Mr. Tom Wittenow and a graphic presentation that he's put together. He's been working on this for some time, and recently we've really been at a point where we can't do much more work on this. We have a lot of workload and staffing issues we're dealing with, but I think some of the work that he's done up to this point will help start the conversation about what we're looking at. And with that, Tom, would it be appropriate for me to turn this over to you?
That was a great introduction, Reed. Good evening, Chair and board members. Tom Whitenauer in the Planning Division. I work in Rich's department, and we were brought into this project several months back when we amended the comprehensive plan to formally put this authority in place to later follow up with land development regulations. We were pleased all the state agencies were in support and it was found in compliance. So now we go about the work, as Reed said. Clarion has done a lot of work to take those thick volumes of notebooks, volume 1 and 2. A lot of it had market studies, property owner information, vacant inventory, and on and on and on, very thorough in one volume, and then the other, all the visions and then images that they prepared. I've been very impressed with the thoroughness of that report. Usually in planning studies, we can only go so far. We have limited resources. Every time I go into those notebooks, I'm impressed. I'm happy to get somewhat associated with this project, even really late in the game. Reed's bringing us back to work with not implementing, first to draft with Clarion and fill in some holes that they didn't have the local and the expertise to fill in some of the architectural standards. So they were successful, Clarion, in boiling down thick documents into really quite a few tables and a few extra sheets, so that when property owners and developers come in to ask, what is the E-zone? I've heard something about it, or maybe we can have on our website sometime to market the area. Graphic information that's readily accessible and easy to understand what this other option is. So the reason I laid those out on the table, if you are having a hard time putting all this together, in your mind three-dimensionally, different land uses, different heights, different depths in every direction, we are also, as a planner, I've been to workshops that presented form-based codes. It never really stuck. It just kind of went in one ear and out the other. So this has allowed me to be a good student in form-based code and learn. Like Reed said, we're trying to understand this concept also. And we're challenging ourselves and Clarion and ACOM. What does it really mean? We want to know what it's going to look like before we get someone in to build and find that it's a few conflicts. So what I'll go through are some slides. This really, it just cracks the door open to kind of look inside the mind of ACOM and this concept. We don't have a full-blown presentation of every district, every type of building type that's in there, just one little block of one sub-district, just to give you some idea. And before I do that, I want to kind of mention something that finally occurred to me a few years ago. When we talk about code, land development code, we throw that term around. Think of it like a computer code. You can write for something to happen, a computer to do a certain activity or a robotic apparatus or something. Whatever you put in there to do, it's going to go through those steps and it's going to produce a widget or product. Regulations that the city writes, that developers and property owners follow, it's the exact same thing. Whatever you write and put in the books, that's what you're going to get. So what you've been getting for years in this area, particularly in the E-zone, is exactly what the city had on the books to code. We're offering another option for developers that may be able to assemble property, or it may be individual properties that are already there that want to redevelop into another option. That's also a code. We call it a form-based code. It is more interested in what the look of the building is, the shape, the height, the comfort level of the pedestrian going up and down the street, more over the use particularly. Euclidean zoning, where you kind of separate everything in different areas, is not what this is. It does some of that and vertically, but form-based is more interested in the shape of the building, and then leaving flexibility for the architect to embellish the facade. If you get the form right, and the uses work for what you want to permit, that's more than half the challenge, and then the rest comes a little easier. It's a faster process. Right now you have different land uses, different zonings, categories that crisscross different lines, all these acronyms of codes spread around. Now, with this other option, a developer would come in and say, I own this property in this district. What can I do? And we can almost hand them, then you can receive a permit and get started. Those are much higher standards than your existing standards, so be aware of that. Yes, it's flexible, but we're making the architects and the developers live up to a higher standard. Let me run through some of these slides, and I handed out a few of them that are just too hard to read on the projector. Of course, you have the area probably committed to memory by now. This is what the current land use is for the area, color coded. This is the master plan overlaid on the same aerial. We want to compare, contrast the two a little bit. And you put on your 3D glasses, you're used to seeing 2 dimensions. What these different texts are, it basically says here's what you can do in these different colors. FAR, land use of retail, if it's certain color, and other uses in other areas.
Tom, just want to, can you point out where this is, just so we have a reference?
Atlantic
Streets.
and Main Street.
Okay.
We're going to try to keep this same view through the slides, so keep in mind we're just looking at that one corner. When you extrude this up, we already have code to this. It's already to some degree a form-based code. We're saying you can go with an FAR of 4. You can do retail up and down the street, and you can do parking in the back. The color stripes in this one and some others, that's just to show the number of floors that are allowed. So if FAR, if you spread your building across the entire site, you basically can go up 4 levels. Other people will, save half of it and go up twice as high. It's just that term is used. With the E-zone, as you've started to read already, and you saw some of the 3D presentations by ACOM, it also has some control of the land use, but instead of FAR, it tells you the minimum and maximum heights that are expected, the setbacks from the street, how many percentage of windows to put in a wall, and let me just keep going and extrude that up. You've seen this, but now we're starting to study it a little bit more. Starting to shape buildings and creating spaces, place-making spaces that are based on studies. There's a comfort level of width to height ratio of buildings. You're not going to see, except in one small block, where you have 2 tall buildings across the street from each other. They did a good job of segmenting it off with different heights. What we did next, it'll come in a couple of slides. That little yellow building there's a mixed-use building type. There's, 5 or 6 building types. That looked like it repeated itself more up and down the street than most, and it looked like the most challenging. So we've then focused in on what did ACOM and what did Clarion carry into this abbreviated report, which are the regulations, should we be concerned with? Because our challenge then was we've signed ourselves up to write architectural standards. If they didn't cover enough, then it's up to us to write more into it. This is the handout I gave you, and this just shows in two dimensions and in 3 dimensions to some degree. You can see you are able to have higher density, taller buildings, more interesting spaces than you currently are allowed to build up to. The choice is yours, the property owners. They might not always have the luxury of all that space. If you see an area that doesn't have a building on it, whoever's developing next door in the block would need to purchase that space. It's done all the time. If you go to New York City or Philadelphia, anywhere, there's probably plenty of places in town. If you see public parks, they were probably privately owned. Whether the city bought it, a private owner bought it, and it's their private park space. That's just another way it occurs. This is another handout, and what we started to do, I would go down the list. We have a 3D type of software where we can stretch and tweak and model what the regulations say to do, how far the setback is, how much distance over a sidewalk you're allowed to do a balcony and an awning, the percentage of glass that needs to be facing the street on the ground level and then the second floor up, so that we could understand and show ourselves first, and then you and developers after. And this, how long this will take is unknown, but how we think this is going to start to look. We can turn it around and go, walk through kind of thing. Once these are done, you can actually put them on Google Earth, and most of you probably have that loaded and look at it. It's pretty interesting. If it's in yellow, there were a couple of places where we think they didn't give an actual dimension or cover something, and we restrained ourselves from writing anything more than they have, because they have a lot in there to tell the architect what to do. It doesn't dictate style at this point in time. There's a lot to go through. It's a little bigger, of course, on your handout, but I don't think that's the intent of this, just to give you an overview of what we've done so far. This was a quick study. The gray building, just the front, that in this case, let's say it's the 16-foot tall facade, a historic building. There's 6 identified in the study. And we're as concerned as you were, and the master plan calls for the acknowledgement and the preservation of the structures. So that front facade that's right behind that figure in the street, if you imagine that's a facade. Now this is letting you into some of our drafts to some degree, but we know, I know from experience, if you have a historic building, even if they want to save the facade, but they build a new building right behind it and straight up, it's going to dwarf the facade. It's going to look like, somebody just has the skin of an old building on a new building. It loses all compatibility. So in this case, we were just studying what should regulations be for historic structures. If somebody has to rebuild behind a facade, if there's some reason they can't save it, or if they want to, this could be 20 years from now, they start to see the success of the E-zone and they want to do something more than their building allows, they could possibly save the facade, rebuild behind it, and go vertical. So if they do that, this quick study is just looking at if they do that, let's set back a certain distance and go up. How about the building next door? You don't want a 45-foot building next to a 1 or 2-story building. So in this one, we were just studying maybe the width of the historic facade is what the next door neighbor has to meet, then they can go up. We don't want to waste the space. Eventually, every square footage in this zone should be occupied and used to its fullest. So you might want a roof garden up there, all kinds of things, but at least the option to use it. I won't tell you what this is yet, but it's 20 minutes from here. It's under construction. I haven't been in this area for a while, so let me just show you a few pictures first. I don't know that they had form-based code, but what they did here, they were doing everything right. This is all one development, and then I'll tell you what it is. Okay. That's a new Hampton Inn in New Smyrna Beach, on Flagler Avenue. I haven't read, or I didn't know if there was any controversy, but it looks like it. Yeah, there was a lot. Was it? Because it looked like it was parkland for the most part. I'd hoped I could get a really great slide where it was a little, little one-story business, but it looked like it was, at least for the last 15 years, park space or something. So, but the main thing is whoever did this over the course of, maybe it took a few years. And that's another point. It may have taken them a few years to get to the point where they could finally start construction. If this option of the E-zone is allowed, you'd already have that in place. The fights would already be worked out. Somebody could get started sooner if they live up to a standard, like this or higher. So it's across the street from, a couple of one-story shops, but it works. Steps back. It's got a nice amount of window space. The materials work, and so forth. Now the next examples are different styles, but proportionally, and the attention to scale is similar to what the E-zone is talking about. This, of course, City Place in West Palm Beach. It's been convenient to talk to their staff and obtain their regulations. When they gave them to me, they were about five or 6 pages. I said, "Are you telling me you did this whole project with 5 or 6 pages?" What's different there, of course, is everything was cleared off. It probably was done by one property owner, one developer, so that saved a lot of time. But they were more interested in the form than the use. It has high arcade of spaces, similar to that mixed-use example, which gives you some protection from shade and these downpours that we have here. It's also a comfortable way to go down the sidewalk as an alternate to the sidewalk right down the street, to have that recessed arcade. And then it allows balconies to hang over, and then recessed usable space above that. So there's just a few views. Eventually, if your arcades can all connect, that's great. This is Rosemary Beach. It's like another world, and it costs like another world, I'm sure. Very expensive. Similar proportions, but much different architectural style. So it can be done different ways. Just a few images. It's, of course, up on the Gulf. And this is back to West Palm Beach. But these are the kind of spaces. Could just compare the density, the height, to 1 or 2 story buildings that exist on Main Street now, and the comfort level of tourists and residents year round that might frequent an environment like this may be a better draw. And that's the last slide. So that is just one small block of one part of these 8 districts. They're all very different, but at some point, it may be possible to dig down and do some modeling of the other areas. But that is just a brief overview to do what I had to do. What is this about? Let's put all this together in one, form, put it on a site, and see how it looks. So I don't know that the intent is to go through it with a fine-tooth comb and pick it apart at this point. I think we're still in the education mode for ourselves, and you all are. So it's up to you, board members, and Reed, where to go from here.
I have a question, Reed, and maybe Tom. Do I understand that we're going to actually have 2 different codes in effect then? We're going to have a land development code that says you want to be E-zone compliant, you can go this way, or you don't want to be E-zone compliant, you use the old code? If you're having an opt-in, you must preserve the old.
It's an overlay district, and we have several overlays in the city already in our code. And this is just one more. Think of it as a planned development in that, on the map or whatever, we designate somebody, or historic is another one. And when someone's taking advantage of that historic overlay, our zoning map will reflect that specific properties. And if somebody opts in to that, it will have that kind of a designation. So you will see the difference of who's opted in and who's not.
The overlay has its own.
That's what I'm trying to say. In the overlay zone, you've got an alternate set of regulations. Is that what you're telling me?
Yes.
Okay.
It's an either
so we all
or.
can be clear.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's an either or. It's not I get a little of this and a little of that.
All right. Now, what Clarion is doing is Clarion drawing the regulations for the E-zone plan or whatever, and that would apply if you opt into it. But if you don't, you go by the old regulations, the old land development code.
Well, we're redoing that too.
Well, that's what I'm just trying to make sure I'm trying to figure out so we all understand.
For
what
example,
we're doing.
let's just say the rewrite is taking longer, and this moves right along, and this can be placed into the current land development code as you have it today as part of that one more overlay zone. Okay.
So we're working on an overlay zone, and at the same time, we're rewriting the regular land development code?
Yes, so there could be, you could have these E-zone regulations put in place theoretically, if everyone approved it, ahead of and before we get to a complete rewrite of our land development code, which was its intent all along.
Okay, we just all just need to know what we're working on
Sure.
at what time, and
Sure.
Mr. Chairman,
Reed.
I think, Reed, your introduction about the E-zone regulations was a very elegant, very graceful softening, I think, of the initial effect, which was like a hammer of this document. And I had asked, I guess, 2 meetings ago in the last meeting, what happened to the community-based recommendations that went into Clarion? Some from advisory boards in the city like Historic Preservation, others from community neighborhood groups and things. What happened to them if they didn't make it into this form? Is the process for these people to keep coming back and keep pitching the ball at the city, hoping that somebody will catch the ball? Because while this document made sense as a draft, it also, either by intention or by error or by process, didn't include a lot of things many people expected to see in it. And I'm just wondering, what would you expect of a group like the Historic Preservation Advisory Board? Do you want them, now that their recommendations didn't make this draft, should they continue to throw the ball at the city until someone catches it? And that's the same with community-based groups and groups of different type who participated early on in the Clarion process and filled out forms and made recommendations. I just don't know what the process is, because I think many people see this as a refined draft which has accepted many things and rejected others, but I don't think that's how you see it, and I don't think that that's how we see it. I just wonder about the process that keeps asking the same people to come back and ask for the same consideration over and over and over again. Now, if you're a psychologist, psychologists will tell you that's the process to use if you don't want to include a recommendation, because they get tired of coming back, they get angry, they write letters, you know. And I don't think that's what we want. I think we want a very inclusive process where we're sensitive to recommendations and suggestions from individuals and groups. And maybe if the public review draft had started out with a paragraph that suggested that, then people would not feel as if the bus had left the station without them.
And I would tell you that first of all, from a public review process, there were, aside from this meeting, because we're not out here advertising, nor were we intending to solicit a large numbers now, because it's such a preliminary draft. We wanted to air it out, primarily focused with this board early on,
Okay.
and then we'll move on to a process you saw that was similar to the Land Development Code rewrite. And Rich, Rich Walton has actually managed this contract with Clarion, and he could certainly maybe speak better and more clearly about a process and where we go from here.
I mean, it certainly seemed at Peabody and at the News Journal Center that we were eliciting participants' responses, you know, to the plans, and that we wanted them to write down and give us some response. And maybe I just don't know the way these public processes work, It could be the fault of ignorance on my part. But I do suggest that there are slicker ways, simpler ways of doing it that get fewer people ruffled and would eliminate the email trail throughout our city probably by half.
I'm not, again, I'm thinking that we're not at the point where we're putting out a document that I think we're going to be comfortable with pushing forward and have a forum again until we get some comments back and refine a draft after hearing from some of you that are here. I would think we're going to get that information back to Clarion and make some of the changes.
Okay.
Obviously, the first one, the very first one, deals with the applicability section that is in here.
Yeah.
That is creating some of the concern that this somehow is going to be something you have to do, that you have to follow this E-zone regulation if you're within that geographic area, and that is not true.
Mr. Chairman, first, were you satisfied?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Obviously, I had a reaction at the last meeting, and it was valid. Okay, especially considering the responses that Carrie had given me concerning my questions about being grandfathered in, 60% rule, what have you. One thing that you just brought up, and you talked about planned commercial developments, how you have that. What I don't understand is why we didn't try to implement some of these ideas. If you're going to make it an option, do it like we've done in other areas as planned commercial developments, to where you could put it in without affecting the current zoning or regulations of the property owner. Now, I know you're saying, I differ with what you're saying, okay? And there's a couple of attorneys in the audience who will vouch by what I'm saying, okay? One is that if we adopt the E-zone master plan, well, instead of me duplicating with, basically, Florida law is going to require that it goes into the comprehensive plan. And if it goes into the comprehensive plan, it might nullify some of the current zoning and that we currently have. But what I'll do is instead of being duplicated by me saying this and then you hearing it again, I'm just going to let my attorney wrote these pages, for everybody to read. And obviously, when he has the ability to speak, then I don't need to go through them, because he'll tell you, and you could ask him the questions and he'll explain. But like I said, we differ in opinion. I think ultimately we might have the same goal in mind. I mean, what you're saying, giving the property owner an option, sounds great. If somebody could come and assemble all these properties and build a high-rise and what have you, hey, that's great. But the way we're getting from A to B is not, in reality, is going to screw the little guy, and I'll just stop now. I'm hoping that we could open it up to the attorneys that could actually give you some insight into the process, the way it works, and if we were to institute this, and I know earlier you told me this might be premature, but I don't think it is, because right now is when we're trying to go forward and move this forward, But I'll just stop there and I'll yield to my attorney.
All right, Dino's raising a concern that I think the confusion was, and if it's confusion, and I think Jim has, and looking at his memo here very briefly, applicability starts right on the first page. And that is, and I think it can totally alter what Jim may have to get up and say, is if in fact the E-zone is supposed to be intended as a overlay, that's a purely optional approach, such as going in and doing a planned unit development that the person has to apply for and such, but this is like a master planned unit development as I understand it. But if it's purely optional based on the property owner, I think that may appease Dino substantially, and I think there will have to be some revision to the applicability language.
A lot of revision.
So, I mean, if that's the intent, then I think that may appease some concerns considerably, because I was confused too after the last meeting based upon how you started off this meeting. So,
If I could, and when it came up at our last meeting, there was obviously a lot of discussion about, well, what was that reaction
Obviously, I sent an email to 1 million people.
That's
you know?
right. But the first thought in terms of, well, how can we address this? Because clearly there's the place where it seemed to create some of the concern was in that applicability section 8.2 on page 1 of your E-zone draft, and that was paragraph B. And we're suggesting striking that second paragraph completely out, and that gets us hopefully most of the way there in terms of raising any concerns about what it means, because it clearly confuses
Totally
everybody.
changes the document. I mean,
Yeah. So we,
And-
I mean, you said, well,
And also in the applicability
Take it
under
out.
the summer proposed E-zone regulations, you said, its regulations would apply in addition to and in lieu of the development regulations applicable in the underlying base. And when we had that conversation, in lieu of means replacing, and so in lieu of should be removed also.
I think we can work on that,
I
Dino.
think we need to let the staff maybe go back and do their edit of the
Well,
draft. They have Mr. Morris's,
Yeah.
okay,
We're gonna let you.
thoughtful review. We all were asked, Reed, at our last meeting, to look through it. And my problem was that I hoped that we would get to the point where we are tonight. But again, that's a lot of Sturm und Drang, as the Germans say. That's really, maybe this is the process. Maybe it has to be one of chaos rather than one of order. But if it is, we're doing great on the chaos side.
Well, actually, that is the reason why I have Jim here, is because I think he could put it in an orderly fashion that I think the board would appreciate.
And I certainly do. Jim?
Oh, and Alex too. I mean, but I didn't bring Alex. Other property owners have.
We'll certainly give Alex the opportunity if he desires.
Chairman, board members, good evening. I'm Jim Morris. I'm here on behalf of the Pascalakis family, as you heard. And what I've done, and I don't intend for you to try to take action on the things that I've written for you, but I did look at the basic concepts that I think this code starts with, because you are at the beginning. And I think it's important now to address the basic concepts that will give concern over the long run as this code is drafted. So to that end, I hit points in that, and I'm going to refer to what I've written for you. And also, each thing that I've mentioned, I've attached pages from the code that you're looking at and highlighted them so that you can see it's not something I simply created, but rather there's a reference point where you can look at each of those. So the applicability is the first place. First of all, I do not think that striking the one section Reed had suggested is the right way to go. Simply because, and I also do not think that saying you've got a choice between the two is the right way to go, and I ultimately don't think that will be what occurs. Typically, overlays are in addition to existing rules, and they augment and try to accomplish an objective. And I think every overlay that you've heard discussed tonight prior to this one anticipates that concept. When Tom was making a presentation, and I do want to ask the staff, has the E-zone plan been approved by the state, and is it the intention of the staff to incorporate it into the comprehensive plan of Daytona Beach? Okay, all right. The documents that I've read don't say that. The 2012, July 2012 summary.
You probably were
That's okay. It speaks to the point, which is, and I've raised this in the first section that I'm reading to you or bringing to you, which is when you have your comprehensive plan amended, state law mandates that you adopt regulations to implement that plan. It isn't optional. It is a statutory mandate that you implement that plan through regulation. So that the documents that I read made me think that it was still not done, and I've quoted the opening language. It says, as soon as it's adopted, the intention is to adopt the E-zone regs. Well, when you have that situation, state law and on comprehensive planning mandates that you implement the plan through rules and regulations, which is why I don't think ultimately you have a choice between two codes. I think it will ultimately be where the overlay, what's now styled as the overlay, will become the rule. I'm not certain of that, but that's what I think will happen. And when I hear that the land development code is being underwritten below, it only simply makes me think more likely that that will occur. So to that end, these rules are important. To undersell them as optional, and maybe you won't have to do it, I think takes away from the significance of the concepts. And I want to look at them, and I am looking at them as if they will become permanent binding rules on all the properties within that area. So that's really what I'm trying to get to as far as that first couple of points. And I've dealt with consistency and compatibility. The next thing
Jim,
yes, sir.
May I? Does the comprehensive, I think it's Land Plan Act or whatever, plan, does that require the regulations, or does it prohibit regulations from an either or for compliance like with an overlay?
It's more broad than that. What it says is that upon adoption of a comprehensive plan or an amendment thereto, the land development code of the jurisdiction will be written to implement that plan. And implement, you could figure many ways to do the same job, but implementation is the key. And, you'll see that in the opening part, when you have time to read this, and I intend for you to have the opportunity to read this later. I'd love to have given it to you sooner. I've pointed out that it wasn't mandatory that you adopt this as a part of your comprehensive plan. But it apparently has been done that way, so now you're under the auspices of state law in terms of implementation. And if you look at discretion in decision-making, comprehensive plans are considered to be legislative acts. By legislative, if you think about your old civics class, you've got broad discretion when you sit in your legislative capacity. Once you've made that legislative decision, the law is X, and that's what a comp plan is effectively. It turns into a law of land use. Then the law has to be followed through implementation. So your discretion, if you think of discretion as wide at legislative, narrows as you come to implementation, and it's further still when you come to enforcement. So the point is that your discretion is limited as the plan becomes an adopted part of the comprehensive plan. And state law makes sure that that is the case because state law intends for those plans to be implemented. So as I read these E-zone regulations, to the extent they implement the amendment of the E-zone plan, I have got to believe that they're really in pretty close step with one another, which is why I think it's so important. And you'll see that I had suggested, because I thought the plan wasn't adopted yet, that you should look at the E-zone plan to see whether or not you really concur with the concepts now that you see some of the ideas of implementation. But we're past that, so I'm going to move on. From the perspective of the amenities realm, which is a designated land use, I've quoted you the language as to what the amenities realm is according to the documents written by the planning group. And that is, and it's at page 2 of I've numbered my pages mine are just handwritten numbers, they don't correspond to your plan pages. That is that the amenities realm is a park-like area encouraging public use. Important concept. Because when you apply that to private property, what it means is the plan intends to take private property and designate that property to encourage public use. When you create a public benefit at private expense, that is the hallmark of inverse condemnation of private property. And when you look at the public realm areas, or amenity realm areas, and both terms are used, you will see there are private properties designated with that. Now, the escape hatch is, this is optional. I would say to you, it's optional today. I think it won't be optional tomorrow. So now imagine yourself as the owner of that property designated for public realm. You own the land. You've owned it for many years. It's free and clear. Up comes a situation where you decide you need to borrow money for something, and it doesn't matter what. What lender will loan you money on a property legally designated public realm with no economically viable use, and the off chance that that building is destroyed in a storm or a fire? Its economic viability is gone. And you have taken in this plan, in this code, a designation of amenity realm areas, and they are so vivid in their description. It is virtually a legal definition of inverse condemnation. That is a part of what's in this draft. And if you go back through a couple more pages, you'll see that I've included the corner of A1A and Main Street has a public realm designation. If you go to the other end of the street, you'll see the Rossmeyer property south of the wreck has a significant public realm designation on it, as well as a parking garage. I simply think that that should not be a part of your regulation. That it can be a part of the comprehensive plan where you say, you know, there are areas we think should be public realm. And we would like for those things to be that. And we're going to have a capital element, which is also a part of your comprehensive plan, that says we are going to work to acquire these sites, but we're going to do it at market rate, which is what Florida law requires. So you take it out of the regulatory part of it and you put it into the planning part of it, and you establish a funding mechanism to acquire it. That's legal, it's acceptable, it does not impinge upon the value of the property, because that property owner has their land for the uses it's permitted to be, and they can operate it. It has some financial viability, so it's valuable to sell or finance. That avoids that problem. This plan, this approach runs smack into an inverse condemnation claim, and it certainly devalues the property, and I've spoken to you a little bit about the Burt-Harris Act as well.
And also that property owner is not conceding to the fact that he will, you know, he would sell his property voluntarily.
The next thing, and I've got it as sub B, it's page 4. There is a section in the code which provides for flexible standards of the E-zone rules, and I actually like that section. It's at page 4 of my handout if you want to make it easy to find it. It talks about section 8.3B, flexible standards. There's sub 1 and 2. Sub 1 and 2, 2 down to C, is an acceptable way to proceed. Because the idea is you've got a form-based code, and Tom showed you different building elevations and so on. And if we can ever get that, I think it'd be a great day. But the point is that other people may have other ideas as to how to accomplish what you want to do with your plan. And you should have the ability to use your brain, let them work with you, and have some flexibility in standards, which seem to me to be setting out to be a fairly rigid group of standards as you read through the code. So you should have that ability. But then the kicker comes, and remember, we're talking about asking people to reinvest in an area that nobody's interested in. It isn't West Palm Beach. It isn't New York. It isn't Philadelphia. It is Main Street, Daytona Beach. It is a wasteland. So what you would do to make it enticing, if they bring an alternate concept, is cause them to provide one or more of the following public benefits. They're not seeking a waiver. They're seeking an alternative approach to doing what your code says should be done. And in the writing that I've given you, I've talked to you about the police power, and you've all heard about it, but it is the protection of the public health, safety, and welfare. That activity is balanced against our right to own private property. In law school, Dan and I heard this a lot of times, I can wave my fist around all I want. I'm free to do it. I'm really not hurting Gary or anybody else. If I get close enough that my fist finds Gary's nose, I've entered the place where my conduct needs to be restrained. Police power and private property rights work somewhat like my freedom to swing my fist until I find Gary's nose. Up until the point that I find Gary's nose, there should be no cost to me to exercise my right to act like a nut and swing my fist around. From the standpoint of property use, you've got land development codes that say these things are what we think should happen. Now, whether it happens in an adobe building, a Mediterranean building, 8 stories tall, 2 stories tall, it's what you want to have happen there. To place a charge upon that by causing a public benefit to be created, it is again reaching into the pocket, into the property rights of the property owner who has the right to use their property so long as it is used in a way that does not harm others. And your code, your police power exercise in the form of the code, defines what those objectives are. By permitting flexibility, to me it says that if you choose between Dan and me, we're similar, but we're not alike. Maybe I'm up to code because I've got a coat and a tie. Can Dan do the job? Promise you he can. I've known him a long, long time, but he's not up to code. Why can't you choose Dan? Well, you're going to have to pay an extra fee to choose Dan. It makes no sense. It's abhorrent to your standards of redevelopment as well as property rights, and you should strike it immediately and do not let it come back. It should not be in there. If a waiver was requested versus a change in standards, there's some argument for that, and you see that in PUDs where there is a waiver. For instance, you're supposed to do a certain thing, you ask for relief, and I'm talking about code compliance versus an excuse from code compliance. That's the difference in the two that I see. So in that instance, you look at some compensating benefits, but there's a distinctively different standard where someone says, I'll comply, I just choose to comply with a blue shirt and no tie versus a coat and a tie. Still going to do the job. Either of us can go to court and do what we need to do. But when I say, you know what, I'd really rather just not go to court, I'm seeking some sort of a waiver. And that concept is different than simply complying in another way. And if you want to have reinvestment in Main Street, and if you want people to come in and find a way to work with you, you need to have the freedom to work with them without penalizing them. And you say, well, you know, we wouldn't do that. Somebody in the audience will tell you you should. And then it's going to just snowball from there, and you lose that ability. You'll get so much more through negotiation and effort and compromise than to put this sort of a standard in, which is going to come to you. And the planners, it's become fairly common planner jargon to say, we've got to create a public benefit. I'll tell you that the law does not require that. It is a planning concept, but it is not a legal concept that's required to be done. And I think wholeheartedly that you should strike it. I want to move,
You
sir.
think that's why City Place first went in, the city bought all the property, so it was in total control and had no property owners like Dino to have to deal with. They did have a church, and they had to keep the church in the church's location.
Yep. Well, when you want total control, you should have total ownership.
Right. Right.
That's the way our system works.
Right.
The next thing I want to take you to, and I'm going to sit down after that, Chairman, has to do with the ironic circumstance, and it's at page 6, that the entire boardwalk is shown not permitting amusement uses.
We had a few questions about that, too.
So, and I thought, well, you know, maybe type 1 retail, type 2 retail, maybe, you know, that means something else. Although these terms aren't defined in this code, or at least if they are, I haven't found the definition. And you certainly have a definition of, should have a definition of what your terms mean. But it's not there to my knowledge. I can be corrected. So you've got 2 types of retail. And then you go over and you look on the next page, which is a convention hotel, and that's kind of the district regulations for that area. You see how those things work in terms of the type 1 retail. For ground floor buildings facing the boardwalk that shall be devoted to principal retail sales and services for at least 30 feet behind the arcade or facade facing the boardwalk. Uses of remaining parts of buildings may include lodging and other retail sales and service uses, as well as conference meetings and pre-function space, etc. So thinking that maybe I had misunderstood something, or there was a term that I didn't know, I went looking to find amusement. And if you'll turn to page 8, you'll see that I found something that appears to resemble it. I'm not certain that that's what it is, though, because the term isn't defined. And you will see that there is a recreation designation. And there is language in the code that speaks about amusement and recreation. And I have to assume, since the terms aren't defined, that that is more like what you would expect to find on the boardwalk, and that's what it is today. So the concept of the boardwalk, when you look back at page 7, page 6, assumes a monolithic convention hotel facility. That concept ignores the fact that there are private property owners that own the ground on the boardwalk, and that they're not going to have a convention hotel. They don't have enough property to do it. It isn't their business. And for a couple of generations, they have had amusement/recreation. I think that's what they have under this E-zone code. Yet this code, without a blink, makes them non-conforming and would effectively wipe them out. And it simply reinforces my thoughts in relation to the amenities realm. So as you go through these code sections, I'm asking you to take the inherent concepts of protection of property rights, respecting existing users and permitting them to survive, to not presuming that a monolithic single-tier developer will overwhelm them and develop everything, and you ignore the rights and the use of those properties in favor of that concept. And against that backdrop, consider our history to date. I've lived in this county all my life, and I remember when Main Street was an active, booming place. But I think the end of that came, I'm going to think it's starting to go downhill in the mid-'70s. I stand to be corrected by Ms. Doan, who knows the area much better than me. But, you know, it was a community center once. It was commercial. It related to the town of Daytona over on the beach and that kind of thing. I'm not saying that it can't be viable. But what I am saying is that you will not get people there with a bulldozer approach where you try to push them in and also run over the people that are there already. I think that's what this code in its inherent initial concept does. And if you've got a part of the adopted comprehensive plan there, that plan is going to cause you to implement those concepts. And you need to be very wary as to what the plan requires and how the concepts in the code relate back to the plan, because now your discretion has been limited, but you can still look to the plan as a reference point. And your code drafts should certainly, the suppliers of those drafts, should be required to give you the information so that you don't have to kind of parse the code out, the plan out yourself to try and make that linkage. You're a volunteer board. And when I heard that Clarion wouldn't come to a meeting, which is what I did hear the last time I was here, I was like, what? They're going to write this stuff and send it, and they won't come? If that was incorrect, I did hear that last time, and you certainly, all of us need representation. I think all of us want to see this community recover and do better, and it can. There's no reason for it not to from a physical perspective. But when we keep stepping on our own feet and falling down, it doesn't matter what physical assets we have. We're going to stay like we are. And this code is not taking us in the right direction. Thank you.
Jim, have you had a chance to discuss any of this with staff and such yet?
No, I haven't. I got the code section, and I've been extremely busy.
I understand.
And I did give the staff copies of this, and I'm certainly willing to do that.
I would like to encourage that and see if you can't work with them and maybe reach some consensus and avoid.
I'd be glad to.
Avoid the discussion with us and such. But I find this extremely helpful to me, and I think the other board members will too. A lot of refresher course for me, but I appreciate it. It's been very helpful. But I would like to see you work with the staff a little bit and see if we can get some consensus.
These are
going
good
on
folks
it.
to work with.
Yeah, I agree.
Right. And Mr. Chairman,
and they didn't write this.
Exactly.
Right.
But they're the ones that are going to have to work with it. And I would much rather see us, and I'm truly enlightened to see you here dealing with this on the front side, okay, before we get into a Ponce Inlet type situation or worse, you know, how not to do things. So this is, I think, the way we should be doing it, and I appreciate it truly. So
we'll be glad to
Mr.
work.
Chairman,
Thank you.
just so you know, I had a meeting with Mr. Reed and with Paul McKittrick, you know, because after I left this meeting, I was very upset, and I did write an email out and send it to a lot of people, basically accusing the consultants of trying to steal our property. I'm sure Big John's over there, and he got a few of them. And so they called me in, you know, so we could discuss it. We were supposed to have a meeting prior to this meeting where we worked it all out with Jim Morris, but staff never got around to being able to set up that meeting with, you know, I got a telephone on Monday by Reed saying, you know, can we set it up now? But Paul McKittrick wasn't able to attend.
Chairman,
and at that point, we couldn't get to it.
I will follow up.
I know you will, Jim.
And if it doesn't work, I'll let you know, but I think it will work, and that's what we'll do.
I'm sure we all have the same goal in mind, so I think it'll work.
I think we're paddling in the same direction, so, or hopefully.
I'm sure that Clarion does not have a different theory of the law.
Well,
To me, I can't imagine that we've gotten this far based on no philosophical foundation. They must feel or believe something that hasn't been expressed literally or even figuratively in any of the drafts. This is constructed on a on case law.
I would love to see the case law to support it. I'm going to let Mr. Ford come behind me because I'm sure he's got some opinions on that. But I would also, just on the idea of the waiver and the necessity to create a public benefit, I think if you received an opinion from your city attorney's office, you might find some common ground between me and them.
To me, it was just, when I got the copy of the regulations, I won't use the word incredible, but it was just, it was very difficult for me to figure out how we had gotten to that.
Yeah. We didn't even get to the question of common walls and easements, but that's a different story for another night. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Reed, with respect to staff, if staff would like to try and respond to anything tonight, that's fine. Otherwise, we can hold off, but whatever their preference would be, as far as, giving any feedback to or comments. So.
Yeah, I think it was very helpful, and it's always enlightening to hear from Mr. Morris and get some of those perspectives as we read this, and so we need to take that seriously, those comments and the information we have here, and digest this, and allow our legal staff as well to give some information and have a conversation with Clarion as well. Yeah. So all of that has to and should be happening between now and your next meeting.
Okay, good.
Okay.
Very good. Alex, did you want to give us some words of wisdom?
I don't know if I have any of those, but my name is Alex Ford, 145 East Rich Avenue, DeLand, representing a few property owners in this district also. And Jim's obviously done the heavy lifting here, and I'll try not to duplicate what he said. I do disagree with him on one thing, because I went to law school with Dan, and he didn't hear anything in class because he's the only one in our class that missed more classes than I did. His excuse, he was usually off working construction. I was usually on the basketball court. But anyways, I was very pleased to hear, congratulate what I understand to be the thought process here locally. I was glad to hear what staff said tonight, because the staff version versus what I read, and I did not have a chance to speak with staff ahead of time, is refreshing actually, as opposed to something that we would be fearful of. What I read, I was somewhat fearful of. The one, I think, correction, and I think it's I'm sure it'll be corrected the next draft, but there were several items in the consultant's report that were actually not optional on the part of a property owner or a developer. They were actually mandatory. So if we could get with staff and go through those, I don't need to bore you with the details, but there were at least 3 different sections that led me to believe these things are not optional. These are going to be thrust upon the landowner. And they're fairly significant, including Mr. Morris's concern about the what amenities, I forgot the terminology, but
amenity realm, I think.
Amenity realm, yes.
Anytime you're talking a realm, you're getting in trouble. So.
Yeah. So that I think that's stuff we can talk about and won't have to be discussed in front of you guys. The permitted uses, loss of permitted uses, that was a point I wanted to talk about. I guess one just basic concept here is it seems to me like when I advise clients, sometimes they'll say, well, we want to do a PUD, and we want to get this PUD in place. Well, what do you want to do? Well, we don't really want to do this. We want to get these entitlements in place so that we can sell it to somebody. And I always say, well, don't do that. That's stupid, because they're not going to want to do what you want to do. They're going to want to do their own thing. And I think the intent here is to create demand on a planning level, and I think demand is created on a market level. My suggestion, rather than going through all this process, is to create maybe in your PUD regulations, just create some concepts there and put it off in your PUD ordinance, rather than having this you've got one set of regulations over here if you opt in, another set over here if you don't opt in. That to me seems to cause a lot of work on staff's part, and it's trying to anticipate what the market might want to do. So it seems like it's a lot of work, might be done a lot simpler just by incentivizing through your PUD process. The really, I think that's it. Other than what Jim's already addressed, I think I've pretty much exhausted it. Jim did ask me to speak about the inverse condemnation, and that is an area of law I practice in. Had a few of the boardwalk cases that back in the 2004, 2005 era, I think it was. I think when you're looking at a public benefit, you are looking at a situation where you're going to be facing an inverse condemnation suit. Basically, if you look at I can't remember the full citations of the cases, but the Nolan case and the Dolan case, U.S. Supreme Court cases, both of those talk about there has to be a related need created by whatever the development is. And if you're addressing something that the development has caused, then it's an impact caused by the development you're addressing rather than a public benefit you're conferring. And there's a pretty big distinction there legally. The other thing, and I did see Jim mention it in his report, is the Burt-Harris Act. And I think you have to be very careful to avoid treading into that territory. I think if we go with this optional concept, if that's the way you go, that's probably going to be okay on a Burt-Harris side of things. But once you start saying this is going to be mandatory, regardless of whether you opt in or not, you do face some problems there. So that's really about it. Don't want to spend a lot of your time tonight.
Thanks, Alex.
So, Alex, so it is your opinion that having your property classified as amenities real public is a taking of your rights?
It's all factual. I mean, it could be. I can't say yes, it absolutely is. It's going to depend on what the facts and circumstances are. But it could be.
Okay. Thanks, Alex.
Right, thank you.
Tom, based on something you said earlier and Alex kind of triggered, is, correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't you indicate that the criteria under the E-zone plan would be a greater level of criteria than under the higher standard than under the existing code?
Yes, I believe it
Okay.
is.
So I get down to this fundamental question of, we really want people to go to the E-zone and follow those criteria and standards so we have the consistency and the development. But why would somebody want to do that if it's going to be a higher standard and more difficult than it is under the current? It seems like they'd be shooting themselves in the foot.
That's a good question. And let me thank you for your opinions on our review. Your review and critique, that helps a lot. And your attitude towards it is constructive. What is the benefit? The benefit is it streamlines the process. Instead of a property owner having to go through a rezoning process, which takes, could be four months, or a comp plan land use amendment, which adds even more time and several steps. They're able to receive rapid permitting if they comply with the E-zone optional overlay. So that's a benefit. That adage, time is money.
But could that still?
Certainty, because if somebody invests or they already own property and they want to do something creative, a little outside the box, yet it fits within the E-zone, there's some certainty, a lot of certainty that they'll get approval.
But could that still be accomplished through PUD?
Sure. Yes.
Well, that's what they're saying.
Mm-hmm. Yes, somebody could, correct me if I'm wrong, Rich, but somebody could still use the PUD or PD process in this area.
PD is not a certainty. It's only
It is not.
public hearing, only after that. This is giving the certainty with the overlay. If you follow the overlay, it is certain. That was why we use this concept.
Yeah, but the PUD could be written with the criteria. If you meet these criteria, then you have the same level of certainty.
Okay, well, my concern is, and I think we need to explore and make sure that the level of certainty and the expediency it's going to be worth it to go to these higher standards.
Well, they can't trump personal property rights either.
Well, yeah, well,
Not
that's,
trample on property rights,
aside from
right.
that, I'm talking about the optional approach, but I'd hate to go through all this effort and not have it something that it would be, that a developer or landowner would be receptive to, okay? And that's something to be thinking about here, and I actually talked with Jim and Alex and such about that concept too, because they've got the clients and such that are in this, and all right, are they really going to want to do this, or you know, what's the best way from a developer's perspective to try to approach this too? So,
All right. And, you know, to address to some degree, because it sounds like since it was recently adopted and approved by the state, our amendment does have language in there, even in the policies, that this is an optional overlay. So
we
that
need
that
to
helps.
see that, and Jim and Alex do too, please.
All right.
Well, I didn't hear what you just said, I'm sorry.
That it's optional overlay with respect to the comp plan.
The comp plan policy that we amended that makes reference to the master plan and the forthcoming implementing regulations states that it's to be an optional overlay. And correct, 90% of the time your overlays are going to be mandatory in addition to. So this is unique, you know, but we made that clarification in the policies.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome.
Anything else, Reed?
Well, just back to the when we started this idea of a plan, one of the frustrations was looking at the hotels. I mean, this is where it started, was with some of the major stumbling blocks to trying to get some of the larger projects in here. And I think where the trick is, or the difficulty and complexity is when you start dealing with some of these smaller properties that are along Main Street. There's not a one-size-fits-all. So I think while it may be attractive for some of the larger projects and the people who are saying, I get the package, I see you want a hotel here, I can fit into this, I don't have all these other concerns and question marks about how much process where people are going to, you know, just rally around making life difficult to try to get something done, when we as a community have said, if you build something like this, we can go with it. We can do this.
And what I'm saying is, let's make sure we talk to Jim and Alex such to make
Exactly.
sure that they think that approach will work with respect to their clients that are out there. That
Right, and that's very productive, and I'm looking forward to that.
Good.
So we'll do that.
And we are too.
Good, thank you.
All right. Anything else then, Reed, on the E-zone regs?
Only
For
in
tonight?
that, what I'd like to do next time is let you know that we want to do some of those comparison of the existing overlays, and so you can see side by side what some of those advantages or disadvantages are about height and setback. So it's a little clearer to you. And maybe, no promises, but if we can make or create any additional graphics and give some other examples or address some of the things we've heard tonight, hopefully we'll have some additional revisions that we can bring to you next time to look at. So there's something really black and white in terms of how we might want to suggest how we might revise this.
Okay.
So then, Mr. Chairman, we will continue to use this as the sort of template, and we'll add and delete to it. That's the process.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Very good.
Thank you.
Gentlemen, thank you. And
Thank you.
Jim or Alex, you know, feel free just to call me if you think there's any hiccup or whatever, for whatever I can do. So, thanks. Yeah, that went well. Okay, we've continued 7. We're going on to redevelopment projects update. Read.
Okay. Very quickly, the ISB.
Reed.
Yes.
Very much appreciate staff coming in tonight too and
Tom,
help
thank you.
explain and everything. Thank you very much, Tom.
The ISB streetscape issue, as I I think, finally gotten past not only a contract now, but we've had a few more meetings. Our request was within a couple of weeks to come to some final schedule so we can announce a public meeting where we can start seeing some visual concepts. So, it's been frustrating. We're trying to get that to the point where we can all look at some of the ideas. There's some very interesting and good ideas that
The contract's been led, and we're in like the schematic design phase, conceptual design phase.
Yes, the contract was let some time ago. We had to go through some revisions back in August, and now I think we're finally getting to the point where we can have an opportunity to have the public meeting and allow people to see some of the concepts and make comments and air it out with everybody. So that would be the next thing. I don't expect to see anything until after our next meeting, so we'll have some time. The ice rink is moving forward. That is going to happen. And the electrical is, solved as far as the city's side of it. And it has it's not just the ice rink, but it has advantages for a lot of other things that venues that we can have more options as far as what we do with electrical. Speaking of that, we've done some additional work so that with the holiday lighting around the band shell, and in the future, perhaps down the boardwalk, and start linking some of this lighting together is something that we're going to pursue, but we're going to have to do it in phases because it is a financial issue for us. What we heard loud and clear last year is finish off Main Street lighting. And not only that, but if you went out there, they had these little tiny red lights. We're trying to get that corrected to where we have on the poles something that's a little more vivid and includes all the poles along Main Street. And then there was a question about some of the things we can do on A1A. So we've been having discussions with the lighting contractor that we use now, and we're just trying to get that up to date. And we'll see how far we can go in terms of making some additional purchases. The last thing is to let you know about the holiday parade is something that's coming forward. I don't have all the details, but the Convention and Visitors Bureau has been taking a much stronger interest in Daytona beachside. That's a positive for all of you. And that Jeff Hentz and the leadership there is really becoming focused on the need to address more tourism in this area, the more marketing. Marketing's been one of those things we've really lacked a focus on right there at the beachside. So I'm looking forward to the things that they're going to do and help us with, and this holiday parade that's starting to come together in some fashion, starting with the Thanksgiving holiday, with the Turkey Rod Run, will be something that actually gets achieved. They're getting a late start, but the effort is on to try to create some activity down there in that area and build on it for the following years. So look for that. Finally, Wings and Waves is this weekend. I'm sure you all know that, but if you haven't been looking in the sky lately. And,
the house shook yesterday.
Yeah, it's great to see this, but
It's great if you don't have a heart
if
attack.
yeah,
Jetty came out onto the back deck.
Yeah.
Didn't realize what was going on. Just as all 5 Thunderbirds were going right over the house.
you might think we're at war, but it's going to be a challenge for us. This is probably going to be a much bigger challenge than last time in terms of the number of people, the traffic. This is huge, and then on the week after, I believe it's Biketoberfest. from one to the next. So staff is really challenged at all levels to try to manage and make this a great success with all the people that are putting these events together. And we're excited about it. And finally, I'm kind of excited. This Florida Redevelopment Association State Conference is here, October 24th to the 27th. And,
That's interesting timing.
It is. And you are welcome to come by the Hilton down here and see a lot of my colleagues. They'll have the best practices books out in the lobby. That's free. You don't have to pay the admission price.
Do we have to say nice things about you?
No. In fact, I think they'll probably get there before you do in terms of what they want to say about me. But no, I think that this is a chance to really find out about some of the other communities and what they're doing, and we in not only the city of Daytona Beach but all of our Volusia County counterparts here that have community redevelopment agencies will be involved. So there'll be a tour down to New Smyrna Beach. We'll be going up to Ormond Beach, and we'll be all working together. We don't work independently here. We work together and share with each other how to make ourselves better at what we do as a profession, as an agencies, and for the benefit of the public. So again, encourage you, if you want to pay the admission price, it's open to all of you. I'm sorry I don't have a check I can write these days for you as individuals, but to go there and learn some of the things that they're going to have there, go to the website at redevelopment.net, and that's all you have to type in, and that will get you to all of that information and the program, and you go from there.
Mr. Chairman, could I ask a question on the redevelopment projects? I am continued to be puzzled about the ice rink, because at our last meeting I was told it wasn't a redevelopment project, that it was a project of Parks and Recreation or Leisure Services or something. And now I see it here as a redevelopment project. And I guess, and the holiday parade I know is a CVB project that happens to happen to a great degree in our city. But is the ice rink a redevelopment project? Will any of the trust fund
No trust funds are involved. Again, it's to share information about
So we've
something that's
adopted
to-
it.
It's something that's happening at one of the redevelopment areas, and it's a venue, and anything significant like that I want to share with you. And I think it was made clear last year that everyone wanted to be apprised of some of these projects that are going on.
Yeah, and that's my point, that the appearance standards, are one of the things that are very clearly stated as a responsibility of this board for projects within the redevelopment area. And I don't know about my colleagues, but there were some rather cheesy parts of last year's setup on the ice rink and the portalettes and that whole thing that really did not reflect well, I feel, upon our city. Not that the activity wasn't exciting and a lot of kids didn't have a great time. So as a continuing redevelopment project, and I understand there's a 5-year contract now that's been signed by the city to have this event for this year and 4 more years, maybe if it is a redevelopment project, maybe we can help in some way with some of the standards, especially the design standards, that I think could make it a much more attractive venue than it was we only have last year as an example.
Yeah, I would concur that I think as we understand what's happening and the level of risk of putting this on, because we've shifted all the risk to the entrepreneur, the person who's putting this on. So
well, I think we're waiving the rent.
We are.
So that's a certain degree of risk at a very high period of time, the commercial time, we're underwriting the cost of the upgrade of the electrical. So while we are limiting some of the risk, we're still participating in the project.
Yes, and again, no CRA funds being used there, but there are some investments we're making for the band shell as well, to the benefit of everybody.
And I think that's terrific and long overdue, and I salute the city for doing it. So.
Thank you.
All set, Reed? Okay, thank you. Okay, any board comments? Teresa? Susan?
Yes, I do. I have an idea. When I was walking down Main Street and I saw all these 39 empty buildings, and I keep thinking of ways to get tourists down Main Street, and then I got to thinking, like, we're talking about the air show, and I'm thinking, like, I don't even know all the people that come here for all the different events and interests, but I'm thinking like the cheerleaders, and I'm really thinking like this air show, and you've got all these wonderful empty buildings, and if we would allow vendors, or not even vendors, maybe crafts and art shows for different things, whatever related to, like, they were having a convention. I'm sure there's lots of people who make a lot of different types of model airplanes and that sort of thing, who probably go to craft shows and sell these sort of things. And if we sold items in these empty stores, if the owners of these buildings would let them rent or let them use it, whatever the condition was, and if we didn't sell items that were sold in the stores like David's store or Tim's store, or the items that are sold at Dino's, so we didn't conflict with any of the existing gift businesses, is that something that you, as an owner of empty buildings, would be interested in doing? If we could target the people to go with the special events, would you rent space to them?
If I had it available, I absolutely would.
Okay, so do you think that would be a good idea during special events to get those store fronts open and have a vibrant Main Street?
Well, you're saying special events.
I like the air show that's coming up.
Right.
Now, I know that's in front of Bike Week, and you're
Right.
getting ready for Bike Week, but
Right.
let's say the air show was in August, and Bike Week wasn't anywhere around it, and so those stores were literally vacant and empty and not being opened.
Yeah, and if the event were there on the street, that would be great.
And would we have any conflict, David, or I'm sorry, Tim's not here to ask him, but would we have a conflict with existing gift shop owners if we didn't sell any items that were sold in your stores?
Oh, no, there wouldn't be any conflict at all, but as far as the air show, it's only once every 2 years, and it's only a weekend. So trying to target, for me to go to Teresa and say, Teresa, I want to rent your building for a weekend, for her to make money and me to make money, it wouldn't be a viable solution there just for an air show or something like that. It's got to be something like a Bike Week or Biketoberfest, something that's going to, like, even Thanksgiving turkey ride.
I'm not thinking.
Or something new.
I'm not thinking of something that makes tens of thousands of dollars on these spaces. I'm not thinking of it as a real money maker for the people who own the property. I'm thinking about just to get tourists down Main Street that then would go to the other businesses that are there.
If
I'm not thinking about this as something that makes a lot of money.
Let's say Teresa has an empty building right now, which I don't think she does. If somebody were to come to her and say, Teresa, I want to rent your building for 5 years, I'm sure Teresa's going to say, yeah, no problem. We'll go ahead and rent that. But the problem we're having right now, and it's been mentioned a couple different ways tonight about the Main Street area, is the Main Street area.
Right.
Right now, we can go. This discussion will go on forever. We can bring it up with the thing that was tabled tonight till next month if you'd like. But you got some great idea down the road, but I think we've got some small problems that we need to take care of right away in the near future. But yeah, I'm sure anybody that has an empty space down there that wants to make money, I'm sure Teresa or anybody that owns property would love to open it up for any reason. It's not going to affect me at Salty Dog.
I'm actually thinking more of like hobbyists and people that follow a particular interest.
But Susan,
Can I finish, please?
Okay.
That's more what I'm thinking of. I'm not thinking of this as a vendor who's going to make a lot of money.
Yeah, Susan,
and I'm not thinking of the renter of the building who's going to make, the landlord of the building who's going to make a lot of money. I'm only thinking of people who are more like crafts and arts or special interests like airplane makers and that sort of model that would come in, and for a very low fee for the overhead of the cost, would the people be interested
in letting them rent the facilities?
Well, there's so much involved there, just for the weekend.
Right.
You got
Yeah.
liability issues, you got,
Right.
you got just so much for a short weekend, so much involved.
You've got utilities, you've got occupational licenses, you have liability insurance, you got all these things that go on that cost a lot of money. Then you got special permits if they're just going in under some special.
I mean, right on, I could think if you
Yeah.
were to come in and
It's-
rent a building from Teresa for a hobby craft airplane, and you bring your son or daughter in, and she gets hurt in that building, well, now that's gonna fall back on Teresa.
Suzanne, if
It just wouldn't work.
It's not a viable.
if
approach.
that's like putting a little Band-Aid. If you want
Yeah.
to do a permanent solution, you need to get Ripley's Believe It or Not in the Corbin building, or you need to get something that would be like something like a Guinness World Book of Records in the Corbin building, something that will attract families, attract people to that, and then from there it spreads out.
That's
What
not
I've
gonna-
always said,
Yeah.
what I've always said is that I know everybody praises Ocean Walk, but my personal feelings, if all those little shops would have been, a theater complex in the center of Main Street, and all those shops were to spread up and down Main Street, what is a little tiny plot of land that encompasses Ocean Walk right now, that's 5 stories tall, would have been spread out at Main Street. You would have had a family entertainment area that would have blended right into the boardwalk. So I think Ocean Walk was a mistake, but go on.
Well, I'm not talking about something that's long-term and a permanent fixed solution. I'm just talking about something temporarily until we can get the customer base coming in here to support a viable, acceptable Main Street businesses, that just something to fill those empty shops on Main Street so tourists will turn and come down Main Street.
If you think you can find somebody who's willing to come in and spend the money to move in for a weekend and deal with the landlord and deal with all the licensing and everything, please go for it. But I just don't think it's viable at all.
There are craft and tent shows all over the state of Florida, all through the winter, and these people set up and break down for 2 days.
You're talking
So
about
I'm-
something different.
No, that's the type of people I'm talking about.
Well, if you can put it together, we'll be glad to.
Let me ask you, Teresa, because I can't talk to you except in public, so that's why I'm keep bringing this up. I know everybody wants to leave. Just give me a minute, okay? You said when I first asked you you would have no problem if it was on the sidewalk in a tent in front of your buildings. Is that right? In other words, rather than renting space in your building, would you have any problem as that property owner, and would the city have any problem, Carrie, with allowing tents with craft and arts that are around whatever event is here? In other words, not just all arts and crafts of any nature, but whatever the event that's here, they would have items to sell that are pertinent to that event that's here.
By and large, all outside activities are illegal.
Right.
It is by special dispensation that we are allowed to have the
Right.
outside activities during Bike Week and Biketoberfest that we have.
Okay.
And there's lots of regulation supporting it, around it, in it.
Okay.
So, going outside, you really, by and large, you can't do. You're very limited on the days you can do and the amount of space and
But
what
do
you
you
can
have an objection if the city would allow it? Do you have an objection if there are people in tents in front of your buildings?
I don't, because that would be rental income.
Okay. So let me ask you this. Beach Street is very involved in having artists and events all up and down Beach Street. And I don't understand why we cannot follow suit on that on Main Street. And they're doing it now. They're not doing it after it's all cleaned up and we've got family businesses and big family events on Main Street. Beach Street is vibrant and alive with families, and they're doing a lot of it just through different special events and art events. And so all I'm suggesting is, why don't we try something like that on Main Street? Can we get special permission to have people in crafts and that sort of thing
You'd
on
have
Main
to
Street?
amend the land development code,
Uh-huh.
but just not as a legal matter, but I thought that's part of the controversy to
Right.
begin with, as to whether that's beneficial or detrimental.
Well, they don't want them
Suzanne,
selling the same. They don't want them selling the same items that they sell in the stores that are the fixed buildings. And I understand that. And I'm not suggesting selling anything
Well,
that's in those
it
fixed
would
buildings.
require a text amendment.
Okay,
And
the
so-
next question is, why is our rules and regulations different than Beach Street's?
Zoning category.
Well, no. Beach Street, it's not about the private property. It's about public street
Yes,
and a park.
yes.
There. And so cultural services will issue and approve event permits. That's a different thing. Halifax Art Fest coming up on Beach Street. Fills the street with tents. That costs a lot of money for the police, everything else. And that money for all of those services that are rendered, part of that subsidized by a downtown development authority, which raises another tax and puts that money into different things, but it really has been focused on marketing and underwriting these events. That's the difference you see out on Beach Street when things happen out there. And you don't have the same thing, but you have Main Street, and the Main Street Association and others who will run events, and the street will be closed. If you're on Auditorium Boulevard when the Peabody has the Hippie Fest and other activities, there are tents out there, there are people selling shirts. So there are a lot of things we do in the street that creates activity and makes things happen. So you can do it that way, and right now that's probably the quickest and easiest way to make something happen, but it does cost money.
But what you're saying, Reed, is that there could be, say, a little strip by Peabody, whatever, Hollywood, is that? What's the street called? Auditorium. You could arguably get a permit to close off the street and have half a dozen or a dozen crafts people out there and such like that, and that might be a neat little small project. You don't have to get into renting space and doing all that. That's a totally very challenging approach.
That's the liability too.
Yeah,
It's huge.
but I mean, we were just up in Boston a weekend or so ago, and just walking down and right down by the old historic area and all that, and there were half a dozen neat little tents set up there with neat little crafts. My goodness, we got some nice hand-carved wood stuff. And stuff like that adds a nice little bit of character. And there it was right in the middle. I mean, we're talking Boston prime area, right by the aquarium and all that kind of stuff going on. And some little thing like that pops up, and they were doing their thing, and it's on public land. But it's not renting in somebody's space and such like that. So I think Reed's saying that's something that could be viable, and I think you could do maybe a small area like that to try something out and such. So,
But that's not what's killing Main Street. What's killing
No.
Main Street are all these vacant stores. And then there's
Actually,
nothing but
well,
bars.
To be honest with
the
you-
vacant stores are a result of what's killing Main Street.
Exactly. So I was
Okay.
just trying in the interim is
Okay.
to get tourists on Main Street. That's all.
Okay, David, comment.
Wake up. Well, no, I'm good. I'm good.
Okay.
No, actually, I want to say one thing about Jim and the presentation. I've sat on this board for quite a few years, and I'll have to admit, having Dino bring those guys in tonight was very educational, to say the least. So thank you very much, Dino.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Gary?
Yeah, two things. One, I'm sure we've all seen the editorial in the News Journal that's entitled "A Long Walk Points to Need for Small Steps on A1A." Mr. Chairman, if you haven't seen it, you really need to read
Oh,
this.
I missed that. When was that one in?
Sunday. It's a major,
I was out.
major suggestion on the part of the paper to the city on how directions need to be changed in the Main Street redevelopment area. I've got one for everybody.
Who wrote it?
Other people. It's an editorial, so.
Yeah, but it's.
And
Yeah,
I
but
think I know the commission has seen it, and I
Okay.
think they're very interested in it. Suzanne, in the year 2000, when Suzanne Kewen was the head of the redevelopment area, and Mr. Forrest is sitting in the back of the room because he was one of the property owners on Main Street that we contacted about, in the year 2000, 12 years ago, trying to fill the vacant storefronts on Main Street with artists who would come in and set up their studios, not even for just a week or weekend, but for the off time when there wasn't anything going on in storefronts that were really reserved for special events. And the liability issues and the permitting issues and all of the issues, both city and county, were so overwhelming And we really tried, and the Main Street Board was the leadership board who tried to do that. We tried very hard to do that, and we succeeded a little bit. There were a couple of storefronts that were rented out, but there's some code issues with the bathrooms and no handicapped and all kinds of other things that all of a sudden became very apparent when these buildings were reopened for another use. And so I think it's a wonderful idea, and maybe in time things will change and we'll be able to do things like that. Yeah, I too wanted to thank Dino for looking at the E-zone regulations through the eyes of his attorney, because I think Jim is up on case law in the state of Florida, and I just couldn't imagine that Clarion would position us into such a position of liability. I still find it hard to imagine, and I'll be very interested in chatting with the representatives from Clarion about where this concept, how they seized upon this concept and brought it as a very dramatic part of these regulations, brought it forward. And I want to thank Dino very much for doing it the right way. I think it was terrific.
And I'm just going to make a quick comment. Honestly, my attempt tonight was to be proactive. I mean, I know many of you see me as a fighter or what have you, but I mean, I am sick of fighting. I mean, I actually want to work this out. I mean, if this is optional and you want it to be something for the property owner to where you could get developments and, you know, and the property owner makes the decision whether to go this route or that route, then if that's your intent, I'm sure we could accomplish it. I just don't, you know, obviously trampling on people's property rights is not the way to do it. I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Dino. I have no comments. Good night, everyone. Thank you. Oh, no, public spoke
It's
earlier.
in the beginning. If you haven't gotten,
No, we do them at the beginning, Jeff Big.
okay, if you haven't gotten, the city passed the CRA budget, 4.3 million. 3.2 of that is yours. Have you gotten that yet?
Nope.
The CRA budget for the year 2013, the city passed it last week. So the budget for all the CRAs is 4.3 million. 3.2 million of that is yours. Okay? Did you get your breakdown? You should get it.
Okay, Big, by the way, I'd like to hear what you're saying, but whoever wants to leave the room may, but go ahead and say what you were going to say.
It's in the beginning now.
We're going to make a special dispensation for you, Big.
And since you moved the meeting, Mr. Chairman, I cannot come. We used to start later. And public comment was always at the end. Big John, 120 State Avenue, the big house on the hill.